She fired him at 10:07 a.m. By 10:23 a.m., he was the only reason she was still breathing. Vanessa Holloway had built a billion-dollar empire on one unshakable belief: that she could read people faster than anyone in any room. She prided herself on it, bragged about it at conferences. She was wrong about Derek Cross in every possible way, and it nearly cost her everything. This is the story of the most expensive 16 minutes of her life, and why the quietest man in the building turned out to be the most dangerous person anyone in that parking lot had ever faced. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started in the way most mornings did when you worked for Vanessa Holloway, at a pace that left no room for breathing, thinking, or being human. Derek Cross had the black Cadillac Escalade idling at the curb outside her Midtown Manhattan penthouse building by 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes ahead of schedule, the way he always did. Not because Vanessa ever acknowledged it, not because she ever said thank you. He did it because he was built that way. Precision wasn't performance for Derek, it was just the way his brain operated, the leftover wiring from a decade of doing things in environments where being 13 minutes early could mean the difference between coming home and not coming home at all. He stood beside the rear passenger door with his hands clasped loosely in front of him, wearing the same dark suit he wore every day, his posture relaxed but not sloppy. A few of the building's morning staff had learned over the past 11 months to give him a nod when they passed. He always nodded back. He didn't say much. People in the building had stopped trying to pull conversation out of him after the first few weeks. Not because he was cold, exactly, but because there was something in his stillness that made small talk feel unnecessary, like interrupting someone in the middle of a thought they hadn't finished yet. His phone buzzed once. He glanced at it without moving his head. A text from his mother. Lucas ate breakfast this morning without a fight. Miracle of the century. Derek's mouth pulled into something close to a smile. He typed back with one thumb. Did he eat the crust? 3 seconds later, don't push it. He tucked the phone back into his jacket pocket. Lucas was 6 years old and had been waging a personal war against bread crusts since the age of 4. It was, in Derek's private opinion, one of the more reasonable positions his son had ever taken. He made a mental note to pick up the good sandwich bread on the way home, the kind without crusts already, which cost about $1.50 more, and which Derek considered one of the better investments he made on a weekly basis. The lobby doors swung open at 6:59, and Vanessa Holloway came through them the way she always did, like the building itself had been waiting for her permission to exist. She was 30 years old, which still surprised people who didn't know her, because there was nothing remotely uncertain about the way she moved through a space. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer with the sleeves pushed up exactly one fold, dark trousers, heels that added 2 inches she didn't need. Her hair was pulled back. Her phone was already in her hand, and she was already talking into it. I don't care what time it is in Singapore, Marcus. I care what the answer is. Find me the answer before I land this afternoon, or find me a new Marcus. She didn't break stride. Derek had the door open before she reached it. She got in without looking at him, which was, in 11 months, the most consistent thing about her. He closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, got in, and pulled smoothly into traffic. He already knew the route. He always did. Checked it twice before leaving the parking structure each morning. There was a preferred route and 2 alternates. This morning, the preferred route down 7th Avenue was showing a developing incident near 44th Street. A fender bender that had grown, based on the traffic feeds, into something involving a delivery truck and what appeared to be a broken water main. The kind of thing that started as a 5-minute delay and turned into 45. He took the alternate without announcing it, swinging north on 8th, cutting across 51st, threading down toward the FDR. For about 4 minutes, everything was fine. Then Vanessa lowered her phone. This isn't the right way. There's a water main break on 7th near 44th, Derek said. Traffic's already backed up past 48th. This route gets us there in approximately the same time without the uncertainty. Silence from the back seat, not the neutral kind. I didn't ask you to reroute. No, ma'am. I have a system. The system works. You don't deviate from the system without asking me. Derek checked his mirrors, merged smoothly into the left lane. Understood. I'll ask in the future. Another silence. Longer this time. You know what your problem is, Cross? He didn't answer because he'd learned in 11 months that when Vanessa Holloway said you know what your problem is, she wasn't actually asking. You don't have initiative. You just react. You make these little quiet decisions, and you think that's competence, but it's not. Competence is anticipating what I need and asking before you act. You changed my entire morning route, and you didn't even clear it with me. The route change saved approximately 12 to 15 minutes, Derek said. Not defensively, just as a fact. That's not the point. I understand. Do you? She leaned forward slightly, and he could see her in the rear view, jaw tight, eyes sharp. The look she got when she'd already made a decision and was just finding the language for it. Because I've had conversations like this before, and somehow they never seem to stick. Derek didn't say anything. He navigated the Escalade through a gap in traffic with the same steady hands he'd used for everything else that morning. I need someone in this position who understands how I operate, Vanessa said. Not someone who does things their own way and then explains it to me after. I think that's a reasonable expectation, Derek said. She sat back, looked out the window. We'll talk when we get to the office. We'll talk meant she'd already decided. Derek had figured that out somewhere around month 3. He pulled the Escalade to the curb in front of the Holloway Group headquarters, a 42-story glass tower in the financial district that had her name on it in letters you could read from a block away, and got out, came around, opened her door. She was already on the phone again. She walked past him without stopping. He parked the car and rode the elevator up to the executive floor, the way he always did after drop-offs, to wait in the small driver's lounge near the security desk until she needed him again. The lounge was a narrow room with a single window, a coffee maker that produced something technically describable as coffee, and 2 chairs that had seen better decades. Derek poured a cup, added nothing to it, and sat down. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo his mother had texted him the night before. Lucas at the kitchen table, tongue out in concentration, working on what appeared to be a drawing of either a dog or a very small horse. He'd been trying to determine which for 16 hours. He suspected Lucas didn't know either. At 7:43 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from the executive assistant, a nervous young man named Philip, who communicated almost entirely in bullet points. Ms. Holloway requests your presence in her office, 8th floor conference room. Derek finished his coffee, straightened his jacket, took the elevator up. The 8th floor conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, and on a clear morning like this one, you could see the outline of Brooklyn across the water and the sun doing things to the surface of the East River that a painter might spend a career chasing. Derek noticed this the way he noticed most things, briefly, accurately, and without making a production of it. Vanessa was standing with her back to the door when he came in, looking at the view with her arms crossed and her phone face down on the conference table, which meant she'd put it down on purpose, which meant she wanted to have a conversation without distraction, which was never a good sign. Philip was hovering near the door with a tablet and the expression of a man who would rather be literally anywhere else on earth. "Close the door, Philip," Vanessa said without turning around. Philip closed it, remaining inside, because apparently his suffering was not yet complete. "Cross." She turned. "I've been thinking about our conversation this morning." "All right," Derek said. "This isn't working." He nodded once, not in agreement exactly. More in the way you nod when someone tells you something you already understood was coming. "I need someone in this role who operates on my frequency," she said, "who thinks the way I think, anticipates the way I anticipate. What happened this morning? The unilateral decision, no communication, just doing it your way. That's not the kind of instinct I need around me. I changed the route because the primary route had a developing traffic incident that would have made you late for your 8 o'clock. I know why you changed the route, Cross. The alternate got you here 4 minutes early. I know that too." She picked up her phone from the table, a habit, then put it back down. "It's not about the route. It's about the pattern. You operate independently. You don't communicate. You make decisions that affect my schedule and my day without looping me in. And I've given this a lot of thought." She hadn't. Derek suspected she'd given it about 40 minutes of thought in the back seat on the way up here. And I think we're not a good fit. The room was very quiet for a moment. I see, Derek said. Your final check will be processed through payroll by end of week. HR will email you the details. I'll write a reference. A professional one. I want to be clear about that. You're not a bad driver, Cross. You're just not the right driver. Derek looked at her for a moment. Not in a challenging way, just looked. The way he'd learned to look at things when he needed to see them clearly and remember them accurately. Okay, he said. Vanessa blinked. She'd been prepared for pushback, or an appeal, or at least some sign that this was landing the way firings were supposed to land. Okay? Okay. I understand. He paused. Is there anything else you need before I go? Do you need me to brief whoever's taking over on the vehicle, the preferred routes? Philip can handle that. Philip, from across the room, looked as though he very much could not handle that and would have appreciated being left out of this. All right, Derek said. I'll leave the vehicle keys with the security desk. He turned toward the door. Cross. He stopped, looked back. Vanessa seemed, for just a half second, like she was working up to something else. Some qualifier, some acknowledgement, some small human thing that would have closed the distance between who she was in this moment and who she might want to be. But she was 30 years old and had been running this company since she was 26 and had built the whole thing on the premise that hesitation was weakness, and so she closed the distance instead of crossing it. Good luck, she said. Thank you, Derek said, and meant it, which was the part that would stay with her later. Not the anger she'd been bracing for, or the wounded pride, or even the professional coolness. Just thank you, like he meant it. He left the room. She went back to looking at the harbor. Derek took the elevator down to the lobby level, stopped at the security desk, and left the Escalade keys with a guard named Raymond, who'd worked the desk for 3 years and who Derek had spoken to most mornings, usually about Raymond's efforts to get his teenage son interested in anything other than video games. You heading out? Raymond asked, looking at the keys. Yeah, I'm done. Raymond processed this. She fired you? We weren't a good fit. Raymond looked at the keys, then back at Derek, with the expression of a man who had opinions about this and was professionally obligated to keep them. Man, he said finally. I'm sorry to hear that. It's all right. Derek extended his hand and Raymond shook it. Take care of yourself, Raymond. Tell Marcus to give the video games another year. They might actually teach him something. He went to the driver's lounge, retrieved his backpack. He always kept it there, a habit from his previous life, and the framed photo he kept on the windowsill, the one of Lucas that his mother had taken last summer. His son, mid-laugh on a beach somewhere in Connecticut, covered in sand up to his elbows, looking like the most purely happy person who had ever existed. Derek looked at the photo for a moment, slipped it carefully into the front pocket of the backpack where it wouldn't get jostled. Then he walked out of the Holloway Group building into the morning air of Lower Manhattan, put on his sunglasses, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk the way you do when you've just had your day restructured without warning and you need a second to let your brain recalibrate. He wasn't angry. He'd been through things that made getting fired feel like a weather change. Noteworthy, briefly inconvenient, and then just the new condition you operated in. He'd figure out the next thing. He always did. He had 3 months of savings, a son who needed him home by 6, and a very clear sense of what mattered and what didn't. He started walking toward the subway. He'd made it maybe 60 feet from the building entrance when he heard it. The scream was sharp and high and cut through the ambient noise of the financial district, the way a fire alarm cuts through a conversation. You don't process it as sound first. You process it as something is wrong, the signal going straight to the part of your brain that predates language and lives entirely in the body. Derek stopped walking. He turned. 2 women had burst through the side exit of the Holloway Group building, both of them running, one of them looking back over her shoulder with the whites of her eyes showing in a way that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with actual terror. A man in a building maintenance uniform was backing away from the parking structure entrance with his hands up, and there was a sound from inside, a sound Derek had heard before in places he didn't think about during the daylight hours. The specific acoustics of voices giving orders at volume inside an enclosed space. His brain ran the calculation in under a second. not consciously. His conscious mind was still processing. There are people running, but the deeper part of him, the part that had been trained over years in conditions that would make most people's nightmares look like mild unpleasantness, that part had already begun. He set his backpack down on the sidewalk beside a concrete planter. He straightened up, and the man who had been a quiet driver for 11 months became, in the span of a single breath, something else entirely. There were 5 of them. He determined this in the first 4 seconds, 2 near the parking structure entrance, positioned to control movement in and out. 1 at the wheel of a dark panel van idling at the far end of the parking level, engine running, positioned for fast exit, which meant the extraction was planned for speed over subtlety, which meant the team was confident in their control of the space. 1 moving through the middle of the parking level with what appeared, from Derek's angle, to be a submachine gun on a sling under a jacket that wasn't covering it well enough. And 1, the one in charge, he could tell by the way the others tracked his movement without being told to, standing next to Vanessa Holloway with a hand gripped into her arm and speaking very close to her face. She was not screaming. She had gone very still, which was, Derek noted with a kind of removed professional clarity, actually the smartest thing she could have done. The parking level was 3/4 empty. It was early, and most executives didn't arrive until 9. There were 7 visible civilians, 2 building employees pressed against a support column near the elevator bank, 3 office workers crouched behind a car in the second row, 1 man who appeared to have simply sat down on the ground and wasn't moving, and Raymond's colleague from the security desk, who was on his radio but doing it very quietly and very carefully. The police had not arrived. They would be called. They would take, in Derek's estimate, 6 to 9 minutes from the moment of the first call, assuming whoever made it had already done so, which was not guaranteed. 6 to 9 minutes was a very long time. He moved. He didn't run. Running drew attention in a way that controlled, purposeful movement didn't. He came in low and deliberate along the concrete wall, using the angle of a parked SUV to stay out of the sight line of the man near the entrance, and he had covered about 20 feet before the closer of the 2 men at the entrance turned in his direction. The man opened his mouth. Derek reached him before the sound came out. What happened in the next 4 seconds was not dramatic in the way movies make these things dramatic. There was no dialogue, no moment of confrontation, no dramatic pause. Derek applied a specific sequence of controlled force to a specific sequence of points on a human body, and the man went down, and Derek caught the submachine gun on its sling before it could clatter on the concrete, because noise was a problem. He was already moving before the second man at the entrance fully processed what had happened to his partner. That man was bigger, wide across the shoulders, the kind of build that made most physical confrontations go his way before they started. He swung with his right hand, which was the predictable choice, and Derek wasn't where the swing went. There was a brief economical exchange. The second man ended up on the ground next to the first. Derek straightened his jacket, exhaled once, and assessed. The man in the middle of the parking level had heard something. Not enough to know what, but enough to be turning, scanning. The driver of the van had his window cracked and was watching the entrance in his mirror. And the man holding Vanessa, the one in charge, had gone very still in the specific way that someone goes still when they realize the plan has developed a variable they didn't account for. He turned toward Derek. He was about 40 feet away. Lean, dark jacket, a scar along his jawline that suggested this was not his first complicated situation. He looked at the 2 men on the ground near the entrance, and then he looked at Derek, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not yet, but the particular recalibration of a professional who has just realized the job got harder. "Who the hell are you?" he said. Derek didn't answer that. He said, "Let her go and walk away. You can still do that." The man studied him for a moment. Then he pulled Vanessa tighter and said something to the man in the middle of the parking level. The middleman raised his weapon. Derek had already moved. What followed was not clean. He wanted to be clear about that later in his own head, because he had spent years trying to make something clean out of the years that weren't, and he had mostly succeeded, but this was not clean. His shoulder hit the concrete when he rolled to get out of the sight line. He hit it wrong. the old injury from a deployment he didn't talk about, and it sent a bolt of white through his vision that he filed away for later and kept moving. He got to the man in the middle the long way, coming from behind a concrete support column, and there was a struggle that involved the weapon, a vehicle mirror getting destroyed in a way that would be someone's problem tomorrow morning, and eventually Derek's elbow and the specific vulnerability of a human knee, and the man went down with a sound that was unpleasant but survivable. Two problems remained. The van, the man in charge. The man in charge had started moving, pulling Vanessa toward the van because the plan was falling apart and the exit strategy was still the exit strategy. Vanessa was not cooperating with this in the passive sense, meaning she wasn't making it easy, dragging her feet, pulling against his grip, which was slowing him down but also making the situation more volatile in ways Derek was calculating as he moved. "Stop," Derek said, clearly from across the parking level. The man stopped. Not because he was complying, because because he wanted to look at Derek directly, to see what exactly he was dealing with, to make his own assessment. "Step back," the man said. He had a secondary weapon now pointed toward Vanessa. "Step back or this gets complicated." "It's already complicated," Derek said. He kept his voice level. "Your extraction is gone. Your team is down. The police will be here in approximately 4 minutes. The smart version of this is you walk away from her right now and you have options. The other version," he paused, "you don't have as many options." The man looked at him. Hard, measuring look. "You a cop?" "No." "Who are you?" Derek said nothing. The man seemed to make a decision. He shoved Vanessa forward, hard, the kind of shove designed to create distance and disruption, and went for the van. The van's engine revved. The driver was going to pull out, which would mean going through Derek or around him, and the geometry of the parking level didn't make around a realistic option. Derek planted his feet. The van came forward. He moved at the last possible moment, a fraction earlier than it looked, because the appearance of waiting until the last moment was part of what made it work. And as the van passed him, he did something to the driver's side door that was very fast and very specific, and which resulted in the van veering hard into a concrete support column at low speed with a sound like a filing cabinet full of dishes falling down a staircase. He looked back. The man in charge had gotten 10 feet during the van distraction. He dropped the secondary weapon when Vanessa had done something unexpected, bitten his wrist, as it turned out, hard enough to matter, and now he was running. He made it to the side exit. He was gone. Derek stood in the middle of the parking level, surrounded by the smell of burnt rubber and leaking coolant and the specific silence that settles in after sudden violence, and he breathed. One of the women pressed against the support column near the elevator bank started crying. Quietly, the way people cry when they're still afraid to make noise. "It's okay," Derek said toward them. His voice came out rougher than he intended. His throat was dry. "You can move now. Go toward the exit on the left, the one near the stairwell. Go." They went. He looked at Vanessa. She was standing where the man in charge had shoved her, about 15 feet away, and she was staring at him with an expression he couldn't categorize right away. It wasn't the wide-eyed shock of someone who had just watched an action movie come to life. It was more specific than that, more uncomfortable, like she was trying to reconcile two images of the same person and finding that they didn't fit together into anything she'd already decided. "You're okay?" Derek said. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She said, and stopped. "Your wrist," he said. "From the bite. Check your wrist." She looked down at her arm, the one that had been gripped, which was reddening and would bruise by afternoon. She looked at it like she'd forgotten it was part of her body. "I'm fine," she said. Then, very quietly, what did you? Sirens from outside, multiple units converging. Derek looked toward the parking structure entrance. He could hear the radio traffic already, and in the distance, the specific sound of tactical units. Not just patrol, something heavier, which meant someone in dispatch had read the situation correctly. He turned back to Vanessa. "The police are going to have a lot of questions," he said. "So will you, probably." He paused. "You should sit down. Your legs are going to start shaking in about 30 seconds when the adrenaline level's out." She looked at him. How do you know that? Experience, he said. Her legs started shaking at exactly 32 seconds. He'd been off by 2. She sat down on the trunk of someone's parked Honda and looked at her hands and didn't say anything for a long time. Derek stood nearby, not crowding her, not leaving either, just present in the way he'd learned to be present in difficult moments, available but not demanding anything. The first officers came through the entrance with weapons drawn and tactical lights sweeping, and when they found the scene, 3 men incapacitated, 1 at large, 1 civilian sitting on a car trunk, and Derek standing in the middle of it all with his hands visible and his expression entirely calm. The lead officer stopped, lowered his weapon a few degrees, and said, "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" 5-person extraction team, Derek said. 4 are still on site, compromised. 1 fled through the east side exit approximately, he checked his watch, 4 minutes ago. He's on foot, heading north. Jacket, dark, scar on the left jaw. The panel van near column C has your driver, who should be conscious by now and will need medical. The officer stared at him. And you are? Derek reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced his identification. The officer took it, looked at it, looked up at Derek, and something moved across his face. Recognition of a particular kind. Not of Derek specifically, but of the category Derek belonged to. You develop an eye for it in certain lines of work. SEAL? The officer said quietly. Former, Derek said. The officer nodded once, slowly, and then looked around at the parking level with new eyes, at the precision of it, the economy, the way 3 trained men were incapacitated without a single shot fired, without a single civilian seriously injured, in an enclosed space with limited sight lines and a moving vehicle. Yeah, the officer said, to no one in particular. Okay. He sat with the police for an hour and 40 minutes, gave his account, gave it again to a detective who arrived 20 minutes in, answered every question fully and without embellishment. He called his mother at one point during a break and told her he'd be later than expected, and she asked what happened, and he said there was a situation at work, and she said what kind of situation, and he said the kind he'd handle, and she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Is Lucas going to be upset you're late?" "I'll bring the good sandwich bread," Derek said. "He'll recover." When the detective finally released him, it was almost noon. He stepped out of the parking structure into daylight that felt unfairly ordinary. The same sun, the same buildings, the same city that had no particular interest in accommodating the fact that his morning had gone sideways in about 16 specific directions. He picked up his backpack from the concrete planter where he'd left it. It was still there, which said something about the financial district in the late morning, or possibly just about how fast everything had happened. He stood on the sidewalk. He thought about Lucas, about the drawing that was either a dog or a very small horse, about his mother's kitchen and the sound of the 6 o'clock news playing from the small TV on the counter while they put dinner together, about the specific, irreplaceable weight of a 6-year-old who has decided it is time to climb onto your back whether or not you are in a position to receive a 6-year-old. He started walking toward the subway. Behind him, somewhere in the building, Vanessa Holloway was sitting in a room full of people. Lawyers, security consultants, detectives, a PR person who had arrived with alarming speed. And she was not thinking about any of those people. She was thinking about a man walking away with a backpack and a photograph of his son who had said thank you when she fired him like he meant it, and who had spent the next 16 minutes being the only thing standing between her and something she didn't want to think about too carefully. She was thinking about the route change, the one she'd fired him over, the one that got her to the office 4 minutes early. She pressed her fingertips to the bridge of her nose and sat very still in the middle of everything that was happening around her, and she felt for the first time in a long time genuinely small, not in a way that was comfortable, in a way that was probably necessary. Pop-up. By 2:15 p.m., the police had released a preliminary statement. By 3 p.m., 3 financial news outlets had picked up the story. By 4:30 p.m., a reporter from the Post had somehow gotten Derek's name. He didn't know how, and he was annoyed about it. And by the time Derek was walking the 4 blocks from the subway station to his mother's house, with a loaf of crust-free sandwich bread under his arm, his phone had 17 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He turned it off. His mother was on the porch when he came up the walk, arms crossed, looking at him in the specific way she had looked at him since childhood, assessing accurately the distance between what he was saying and what was actually happening. "You said it was a situation at work," she said. "It was." "Derek." He came up the porch steps and kissed her on the cheek. "Is Lucas inside?" "He's watching something with dinosaurs, Derek." "I'll tell you later," he said. "I promise. Where's the—" The front door banged open and Lucas exploded through it at approximately the speed and structural integrity of a comet that has learned to request things. "Dad!" He hit Derek at thigh level, arms wrapping around his legs. "You're late." "I know," Derek said. He crouched down to Lucas's eye level, which put him nose to nose with a small person who smelled like peanut butter and had what appeared to be marker on one cheek. "I'm sorry, bud. Busy day." Lucas examined his face with the uncanny forensic intensity that 6-year-olds apply to everything. "Did something bad happen?" "Some stuff happened," Derek said. "But I'm here now." Lucas considered this for a moment with the gravity of a man weighing a significant decision. Then he held up a folded piece of paper that Derek hadn't noticed he was holding. "I drew you something," Lucas said. "It's supposed to be Rex, my dinosaur. But Grandma said it looks like a horse." Derek took the paper, unfolded it, looked at it for a long moment. "It looks like Rex," he said. Lucas broke into a grin wide enough to rearrange his whole face. "I told her." Derek looked at his son's face, at the gap where a tooth had been 3 weeks ago and was not yet replaced, at the marker on his cheek, at the absolute total normalcy of it. He put his hand on the back of Lucas's head briefly, stood up. "Come on," he said. "Let's make sandwiches. Show more." The sandwich bread went untouched until almost 7. Lucas had opinions about the order of operations. Dinosaur drawing first, explanation of the dinosaur drawing second, a detailed account of what happened at school that apparently involved a boy named Cody who had committed some offense serious enough to require 15 minutes of airtime. And Derek sat through all of it at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his full attention, because this was the job, the real one. The one that mattered more than any of the other ones, and he had learned a long time ago that you don't half listen to a 6-year-old and expect them not to notice. His mother, Eleanor, moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been feeding people through difficult situations for 61 years. She didn't say anything about the news. She'd seen the alerts on her phone. He knew she had, because she'd done the thing she did when she was managing information, which was become slightly too focused on whatever she was physically doing, in this case slicing tomatoes with the concentration of a surgeon. It wasn't until Lucas had been put to bed, a process that involved 2 stories, one argument about the light, and a negotiation about whether Rex the drawing counted as a stuffed animal for sleeping purposes. It did not. They compromised on Rex being placed on the nightstand where he could watch over things. That Eleanor Cross sat down across from her son at the kitchen table and looked at him the way she had been looking at him since 3 p.m. when the news alert had said Holloway Group executive rescued in Brazen Midtown, kidnapping attempt, and given her a very specific kind of chest pain that she had not appreciated. "Tell me," she said. He told her. The short version, not because he was hiding anything, but because the long version had a lot of operational detail that wouldn't add anything useful to her understanding of what had happened and would only give her more specific things to worry about at 2 a.m. She listened without interrupting, which was something she'd gotten better at over the years, though it cost her visibly. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. "The woman," she said finally, "the one you were working for, Vanessa Holloway. She fired you, and then you went back for her." "I didn't go back for her specifically," Derek said. "There were other people." Eleanor looked at him. "But she was one of them." "Yes." "And she fired you 45 minutes before." 16 minutes, Derek said. "Give or take." His mother looked at him for a long time with an expression he knew well. It was the expression that contained a lot of things she had decided, after years of practice, not to say out loud. It was one of the more generous things she did for him regularly. "You need ice on that shoulder," she said finally. "It's fine." "Derek?" "It's manageable." She got up, got ice from the freezer, wrapped it in a dish towel, came back, and set it on the table in front of him with the particular firmness of a woman who has made a decision. He picked it up and put it on his shoulder, because that was the path of least resistance, and also because it did actually hurt. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Find another job," he said. "Take a few days first. Lucas has that thing at school on Thursday, the science presentation. I told him I'd be there." Eleanor nodded slowly. "The Holloway woman, she'll be fine," Derek said. "She has good security. She'll have better security after today." "That's not what I was going to say." He waited. "I was going to say, be careful about what you let yourself feel about it." She paused, chose her words with the care she always did when she was getting close to something important. "You have a way of carrying other people's mistakes along with your own. You've always done that. Don't carry hers too, okay? You did what you did today because of who you are, not because of what she did. Keep those two things separate." Derek looked at his mother, at the lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 10 years ago, at the way she'd raised him alone after his father left, put him through school, watched him ship out and come back and ship out again, watched him come back changed in ways that neither of them had the language for, watched him become a father and a widower inside the same 18 months. "Okay," he said. "I mean it. I know you do." She picked up her cold tea, made a face at it, and went to the microwave. "You want anything?" "I'm all right," he said. But he sat at that table for another 20 minutes after she went to bed, with the dish towel of mostly melted ice on his shoulder and his phone on the table in front of him with 17 missed calls and a growing number of text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, and a few he did. One of them was from a detective named Reyes who'd taken his statement that afternoon. "Call me when you get a chance. Some things developed. Not urgent tonight." He looked at that one for a while. Then he set the phone face down and sat in the quiet of his mother's kitchen, which smelled like tomatoes and dish soap and the particular warmth of a house where a child had been recently awake and loud and was now asleep, and he breathed. The shoulder ached. He'd had worse. He went to bed. He did not sleep especially well, which was not unusual, but tonight the reason was different from the usual reasons. It wasn't the old dreams, the ones with specific coordinates and specific sounds, that his brain had never fully agreed to file under past. It was something more immediate and less dramatic. A parking level. A woman sitting on a car trunk with her legs shaking, looking at her own hands like they belonged to a stranger. He'd seen a lot of things produce that look on a person's face. He'd never quite gotten used to it. At some point before dawn, he stopped trying and went to the kitchen instead, made coffee, and sat with it in the dark until Lucas patted in at 6:43 in dinosaur pajamas and socks that didn't match, looking for cereal and offering no comment on the fact that Derek was already up and fully dressed. "You have the crunchy kind," Lucas said, peering into the cabinet. "Third shelf." Lucas found it, got a bowl, and proceeded to pour approximately 40% more cereal than the bowl was designed to contain. Derek watched this happen and said nothing, because some battles were not worth the mourning. He dropped Lucas at school by 8, kissed him on the top of the head while Lucas endured this with 6-year-old dignity, watched him disappear through the school doors, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the thin morning light, feeling the specific, daily, non-negotiable gratitude of a man who has had enough close calls to understand exactly what it means to be standing on an ordinary sidewalk, watching his ordinary kid go into an ordinary school. Then he turned and walked to the subway and went back into the city, because Detective Reyes had called again at 7:15, and this time had left a voicemail that suggested the situation had, as situations tended to do, developed additional layers. The precinct was in Lower Manhattan, close enough to the financial district that Derek could see the top of the Holloway Group building from the front steps. He noted this without particular feeling and went inside. Reyes was a compact woman in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back and the particular economy of movement that came from spending 20 years making order out of other people's chaos. She had a cup of coffee on her desk that she was not drinking, which suggested it had been there long enough to become ambient rather than functional. She looked up when Derek came in, assessed him with the same professional thoroughness she'd applied the day before, and gestured at the chair across from her desk. "Thanks for coming in," she said. "Coffee?" "I'm all right." She picked up a folder and opened it, which Derek recognized as the move of someone who was about to tell him something they were framing carefully. So, the man who fled yesterday, the one in charge. You identified him. We identified him. She turned the folder so he could see the top sheet, which had a photograph and a name. Marcus Fell. 44, professional background in private military contracting, 3 years with a firm out of Eastern Europe that disbanded under circumstances we're still looking into. He's been on a federal watch list for about 18 months in connection with a kidnapping for ransom operation in the Gulf region. She paused. He's also currently in federal custody as of about 4 this morning. Derek looked at the photograph, the scar on the jaw. Where? Newark. He tried to cross into the transit hub. We'd flagged him at the Port Authority. He's not talking, but he doesn't need to because the 3 men you left us with are talking enough for everyone. She closed the folder. Here's the thing I need you to understand, Mr. Cross. This wasn't opportunistic. Fell's team had been surveilling the Holloway group building for at least 3 weeks. They had schedules, access points, shift changes. Somebody hired them. Derek was quiet for a moment. You know who? We have a direction. We're not sharing that publicly yet. She studied him. What I want to know is whether, in your 11 months working for Ms. Holloway, you observed anything that seemed unusual, visitors who didn't fit, conversations that seemed off, anyone paying the wrong kind of attention. He thought about it genuinely, going back through 11 months of mornings and routes and lobbies and waiting rooms. He was good at this, at replaying environments, at identifying the thing that had sat wrong in the moment without fully registering as a problem. There was a man, he said, about 6 weeks ago. He was outside the building on a Tuesday morning, which I noticed because it was raining and he didn't have an umbrella, and he was standing in a position where he could see both the main entrance and the parking structure entrance simultaneously. He was there when I dropped Ms. Holloway off, and still there 40 minutes later when I came back from fueling the vehicle. He had a phone to his ear, but he wasn't talking. Reyes was writing. Description? He gave it. She wrote without looking up. Anything else? A car, he said. Dark blue sedan, older model, parked on the cross street 3 times in the last month. Different spot each time, but always with a sight line to the building. I noted the plate the 3rd time. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his phone, went to his notes. He'd photographed it the 3rd time he'd seen it. He turned the phone so she could see. Reyes looked at the photograph, then she looked at him. You took a photo of a license plate. I take photos of things that don't fit, Derek said. Habit. She studied him for a moment in a way that was not uncomfortable but was very thorough. Mr. Cross, can I ask you something outside the official context? Sure. How long were you in? 10 years? SEAL? Yes. And you've been driving for this company for 11 months. That's right. She seemed to be putting something together internally. You didn't list your military background on your employment application. It's not required. It's not. No. She tapped her pen against the desk twice. I'm going to be honest with you. The way you handled yesterday, the way you contained that situation without a weapon, without a casualty, in an enclosed civilian space, that's not something most people can do, including a lot of people who get paid specifically to do that kind of thing. Derek didn't say anything. I'm not asking you to account for it, Reyes said. I'm just observing that the Holloway Group's existing security apparatus had 2 guards on shift change during one of their most vulnerable windows and a surveillance system with a 15-minute recording lag. And you were an ex-SEAL driving their CEO's car, and nobody on their security team apparently knew that. I didn't advertise it, Derek said. No, she said. You really didn't. She closed the folder. We'll be in touch. If anything else comes back to you, call me directly. She slid a card across the desk. He picked it up. The 3 men. They'll be charged? Federal charges. Kidnapping, conspiracy, weapons violations? Yes. She paused. You'll likely be asked to testify. I know. He stood, tucked the card into his pocket. You said someone hired Fell's team. Is Ms. Holloway in continued danger? Reyes looked at him steadily. We're treating it as an open threat, yes. Her private security team has been briefed. She also has a detail from our department for the next 72 hours while we run down the rest of the operation. Derek nodded, put on his jacket. Mr. Cross, Reyes said as he turned toward the door. He stopped. She knows you saved her life, Reyes said. I'm not sure if that matters to you, but she knows. He thought about a woman sitting on the trunk of a Honda with her legs shaking, looking at her hands. Take care of yourself, detective, he said. He left the precinct and stood on the front steps in the morning air and let himself feel, briefly and privately, the weight of what Reyes had just told him. Someone had hired that team, which meant whoever had hired them was still out there, which meant the operation wasn't over, it was interrupted, which meant Vanessa Holloway's security situation was not a problem that had been solved yesterday. It was a problem that had been delayed. He was not technically her problem anymore. He stood there for another 20 seconds. Then he went home, put more ice on his shoulder, and spent the afternoon doing laundry and helping Lucas with a worksheet about weather patterns, which Lucas found deeply uninteresting and which Derek walked him through with patient specificity because sometimes the point of learning a thing isn't the thing itself. At 4:50, his phone rang. Unknown number, Manhattan area code. He let it ring. It rang again. He let that one go too. The third time he picked up. Mr. Cross. The voice was Vanessa Holloway's and she sounded not like herself, or not like the version of herself he'd observed for 11 months. That version was always slightly ahead of whatever conversation it was in, already at the next point while the current one was still arriving. This version sounded like someone who had been awake for 36 hours and had spent a significant portion of them with lawyers and police and PR consultants, and had reached the bottom of all of that and found herself standing in a room alone with a thought she'd been putting off. Ms. Holloway, he said. A pause. How did you know it was me? Manhattan area code, unknown number, you or your office? Right. Another pause. I got your number from payroll. I hope that's... I wanted to call myself, not have Philip do it. Derek said nothing, which was an invitation for her to continue if she had something to say, which she apparently did and was having some trouble with. I wanted to apologize, she said. I've been trying to figure out how to do that correctly for about... A pause, and he could hear something in it, the sound of a person genuinely working through something in real time. I don't actually know how to do it. I'm not sure I've done it a lot, apologized, to someone who deserved it. That's honest, Derek said. I fired you because you changed the route, she said. That's what it came down to. You made an independent decision, and I interpreted that as weakness, which is... She stopped. Which is exactly the kind of judgment I pride myself on, my ability to read people. And I was completely wrong about you, in every possible way. Lucas appeared in the doorway, assessed the phone call situation with the instinctive radar of a child who knows when an adult is in a serious conversation, and retreated silently back down the hall, which was unusually considerate and made Derek briefly suspicious. I'm not calling to ask you to come back, Vanessa said. I want to be clear about that. I mean, I would like you to come back. I'm asking if you'd consider it, but I'm not calling because I think I'm owed a second chance. I'm calling because I think you deserve better than what I gave you, and I wanted to say that to you directly. Derek was quiet for a moment. Outside his mother's kitchen window, a neighbor was doing something with a leaf blower in October, which was ambitious. I appreciate the call, he said. I know I have no right to ask anything from you, she said. And her voice was slightly rougher now, the polish wearing thin at the edges. What you did yesterday, I don't have a framework for that. I've been sitting with it for 24 hours and I can't just put it in a category and move on from it. Someone hired those men. Reyes told you that? Yes. They're looking at my CFO, she said, flat and even. Elliot Marsh. He's been with the company for 6 years. He's had access to everything, schedules, routes, security protocols. She paused. He came to my office yesterday afternoon, before I knew, before the police told me, and asked me if I was all right. I said yes. He said he was glad. He shook my hand. Derek closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry. I keep thinking, she said, about all the things I've prided myself on. Reading people, making fast calls, knowing who's in my corner. A pause that had some texture to it. The man I trusted with my company's finances looked me in the eye and asked if I was okay. The man I fired for lacking initiative put himself between me and 5 armed men. She stopped talking. He let the silence sit. People are complicated, Derek said finally. Yes, she said. I'm beginning to understand that. Another pause. Can I ask you something? Sure. Were you afraid? Yesterday. In the parking structure. He thought about answering that with something clean and simple. He thought about it for about 3 seconds. There were moments, he said. Not the way most people mean it. It wasn't fear of getting hurt. It was more like a kind of, he looked for the word, awareness, of everything that could go wrong, every variable. You hold all of it at once and your body wants to lock up and you don't let it. That's not the absence of fear. That's just what you do with it. She was quiet for a moment. That's the most you've ever said to me. You never asked, he said. Another silence, longer this time. There's something else, she said. The reason I called. Detective Reyes told me this afternoon that Marsh's operation, it wasn't just the kidnapping. He was trying to destabilize the company, create a leadership vacuum. There are other people involved, still unidentified. She said the threat isn't necessarily over. Her voice had steadied. The CEO coming back, but a slightly different version of her. My security team is competent, but competent and excellent are different things, and yesterday I found out what the difference looks like in practice. Ms. Holloway, I know, she said. I know what I'm asking, and I know how much nerve it takes to ask it. I'm not asking because I think you owe me anything. I'm asking because I was wrong about you, and I know I was wrong, and I think you might be the best person for this job, and I would like the opportunity to be different than I was. She exhaled. That's the truth of it. Derek looked at the kitchen doorway. Lucas had reappeared, leaning against the frame this time, watching him with the careful attention of a child who is doing math. I have some conditions, Derek said. A pause. All right. My schedule includes my son's school events, non-negotiable. If there's a conflict between your needs and his science presentation, his wins. Okay. If I make a security decision, I make it. I explain it after, but I make it in real time. That's how it has to work. I understand. And I'm not going to pretend yesterday didn't happen. I'm not going to perform a version of myself that fits more comfortably into what you expected. I am who I am. I do the job the way I do it, and you know now what that actually looks like. Yes, she said. I do. He was quiet for a moment. Lucas had moved into the kitchen entirely now and was sitting at the table, picking at the edge of a placemat, pointedly not looking at his father, which was exactly how Lucas Cross looked when he was paying the most attention. I need a day to think about it, Derek said. Take the time you need. She paused. Mr. Cross? Yes? Thank you for yesterday. I know you probably don't want it said, but I needed to say it. It was the right thing to do, Derek said. That's all it was. He hung up and set the phone on the table. Lucas looked at it, then at him, with the expression of someone who has several questions and is organizing them by priority. Was that the lady who fired you? Lucas said. Derek looked at his son. How much of that did you hear? Some, Lucas said with the specific vagueness of someone who heard a lot. She called to apologize, Derek said, and to ask me to come back to work. Lucas considered this with great seriousness. Is she nice? Derek thought about that longer than Lucas probably expected him to. She's learning how to be, he said. I think. Is that enough? Derek looked at his 6-year-old, who had his mother's eyes and his own jaw and the particular direct quality of someone who has not yet learned to soften his questions, which Derek privately hoped would take a very long time to change. Sometimes that's a lot, Derek said. Learning how to be. Lucas absorbed this. Looked at the placemat. Looked back. If you go back, are you going to be safe? It was a serious question, delivered seriously by someone small enough that Derek could still carry him on one shoulder, but old enough to understand that the word safe had real weight. I'm going to work hard at it, Derek said, the same way I always have. Lucas nodded slowly like he was filing this under acceptable, but requiring monitoring. Can we have the sandwiches now? He said. The ones with no crusts. Derek got up and went to the counter. Yeah, he said. We can have the sandwiches now. He made them. 2 for Lucas, 2 for himself, sliced diagonally because Lucas maintained that diagonal was structurally superior to straight, which Derek had never been able to argue with. And they ate at the kitchen table while Lucas explained at length his theory about why Rex was definitely a dinosaur and not a horse, which involved several points that were not connected to each other in any logical sequence but were delivered with total conviction. Derek listened to all of it. Later, after Lucas was in bed, he sat at the table again with the quiet and the dark and the not-quite decision that he was carrying around like something he'd picked up and hadn't yet put down. The shoulder ached less now. The ice had done its work. His phone lit up with a text from his mother, who was 2 doors down and communicated by text because she said it was more efficient. What did she want? He typed back, the job back. A pause. Then, what did you say? That I'd think about it. Another pause, longer. Then, your father used to say the only thing harder than walking away from something is figuring out why you're walking back. Derek read that twice. He typed, Dad left when I was 8, when his mother's response came back in under 5 seconds. He wasn't wrong about everything. He put the phone down, looked at the kitchen, at the drawings on the refrigerator, 3 from Lucas, 2 from earlier in the year, one of which was supposed to be Derek and looked, in his honest assessment, more like a traffic cone in a suit, but which he had put on the refrigerator with full ceremony because Lucas had been very proud of it. He thought about Vanessa Holloway saying, I'm learning how to be. He thought about Detective Reyes saying, the threat isn't necessarily over. He thought about Marcus Fell's team, 5 men, planned, funded, surveilling for weeks, and the person inside the Holloway group who had made that possible, and the other people Reyes had mentioned who were still unidentified. He thought about his mother saying, be careful about what you let yourself carry. He was quiet for a long time in the kitchen of the house where he'd grown up, in the city that had never stopped moving around him, thinking about a job he'd been fired from, and a woman who'd called to apologize, and a son who wanted to know if his father was going to be safe and wanted sandwiches with no crusts and had a drawing on the refrigerator that looked like a traffic cone. He didn't decide anything that night, but he thought about it for a long time, which was its own kind of answer. He called Vanessa back the next morning at 8:43, standing on the sidewalk outside Lucas's school, with the noise of 100 kids finding their way through the front doors behind him. She picked up on the second ring. I'll come back, he said, under the conditions I outlined. A pause. Not the calculating kind. The kind where someone is deciding whether to say the thing they actually want to say or the more managed version of it. Thank you, she said, and it came out quieter than her usual register. I mean that. I know you do, Derek said. I'll be there at 6:45 tomorrow morning. He hung up and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the last of the kids filter through the school doors. A small girl in a yellow jacket dropped her lunchbox and a crossing guard helped her pick it up, and the girl said something that made the crossing guard laugh, and the whole thing took about 8 seconds and was completely ordinary. And Derek stood there watching it happen with the particular attention he gave to ordinary things, which was more than most people gave them, because he had spent enough time in places where ordinary things were not available. Then he turned and went back to the city. He used the next 24 hours deliberately. He went to his storage unit in Queens, a narrow space he kept climate-controlled for a specific reason, and opened the combination lock and stood in the doorway for a moment before going in. The unit contained, among other things, 3 boxes of Lucas's baby clothes that he couldn't bring himself to donate, a set of his wife's books that he kept meaning to find a permanent home for, and a black duffel bag at the back that he hadn't opened in 11 months. He opened it now. Inside was the careful inventory of a man who had put a part of his life away without throwing it out. Because throwing it out would have been a lie, a performance of domesticity that didn't account for the reality of what he was. There was a tactical vest, compact and fitted, a set of communication equipment, a folded document set, and the other things, the operational things, which he checked with the mechanical fluency of someone whose hands remembered what his mind had tried to semi-retire. Everything was in order. It always was. He was constitutionally incapable of leaving things in disorder. He took what he needed, left what he didn't, locked the unit. On the train back to Manhattan, he sat with the duffel between his feet and thought about a conversation he'd had with his wife Sarah about 8 months before she died. A conversation he'd replayed enough times that it had worn into something like a groove, the words always landing in the same order with the same weight. They'd been in the kitchen of the apartment in Brooklyn, the small one with the radiator that made sounds like a person trying to communicate in Morse code. And Lucas had been asleep and she'd been grading papers at the table because she taught third grade, and third grade apparently generated paperwork at an industrial rate. And she'd looked up and said, out of nowhere, the way she did things. Sarah had a way of arriving at a topic from an unexpected angle, like she'd been thinking it through for 3 days and then just walked in with it finished. You're going to feel guilty every time you use it. The training, the thing you know how to do. You're going to feel like it contradicts something. But it doesn't. It's just part of you, like the rest of it. He'd asked what made her say that, and she'd shrugged and gone back to grading and said, because I know you. You think who you were there and who you are here are different people. They're not. They're the same person in different clothes. He looked at the duffel between his feet. She'd been right. She was usually right. He'd found that annoying and then comforting and then, after she was gone, just true in the way that certain things are true without anyone around to say them. He got off the train at Fulton Street and walked the 6 blocks to the Holloway Group building in the sharp October air. He had a meeting at 10 o'clock, not with Vanessa, with her head of security, a man named Carter Webb, who had called the previous evening with the stiff professional courtesy of someone who had been informed that an outside party was being brought in over his department's head and was currently working through his feelings about that. Carter Webb was 53 years old, former Secret Service, with 17 years of private security work between that and now. He had the build of a man who had once been in excellent physical condition and was currently in good physical condition and was honest with himself about the difference. He had an office on the 3rd floor with a view of the service entrance, which was, Derek noted, the correct view for a security director to have. They shook hands. Webb's grip was the kind that was making a statement, which Derek matched without escalating, because he had nothing to prove to Webb, and proving things was a waste of both their mornings. I want to be straight with you, Webb said, once they were both seated, and a young woman had delivered coffee that neither of them was drinking. I've been running security for this company for 4 years. My team is good. We had a gap. Shift change timing, surveillance lag, that got exploited by a professional operation that spent 3 weeks preparing for it. That's a failure I own. But I want to be clear that it wasn't incompetence. It was a specific, targeted vulnerability that someone with inside knowledge helped them locate. I know, Derek said. I don't need a babysitter, Webb said. And I don't need Ms. Holloway's driver making tactical decisions in my operational environment. I agree with you, Derek said. Webb paused. He'd been ready for pushback. You run the security operation, Derek said. I run her personal protective details, so specifically the immediate physical layer. We're not in competition. You identify threats at the organizational level, I manage proximity. If I see something operational, I bring it to you, not around you. Webb studied him. She told me about your background. I figured she would. 10 years SEAL teams, BUD/S, SQT, then direct deployment rotation. He said it neutrally, like he was reading a file, which he probably had been. That's a serious background for someone who's been driving cars for the last year. I needed a different pace for a while, Derek said. Your son, Webb said. Yes. Webb nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee, finally, and drank some. Set it back down. I looked at the parking structure incident, the tactical assessment. He paused. 3 personnel neutralized without a weapon, no civilian casualties, van disabled without lethal engagement. In an enclosed space with poor sightlines and a moving vehicle. Another pause. I've worked with a lot of people. That's not standard. That's not even most SEAL standard. Derek didn't say anything. I want to know what I'm working with, Webb said. Not the resume. I read the resume. I want to know how you think. Derek considered that for a moment. I think about what can go wrong before it goes wrong, he said. Not catastrophically. Specifically. the specific next thing, and the one after that. In the parking structure, the team had a plan, and I had to disrupt the plan faster than they could adapt. Each man you take down changes the shape of the problem. You're not fighting the same fight from one second to the next. You adjust continuously. And the woman, Webb said, Ms. Holloway, your principal. While you're doing all of that, you're also tracking her. Yes, even though she'd fired you 40 minutes earlier. Derek looked at him evenly. She was in danger. That was the fact of the situation. The other part didn't change the fact. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he made a decision. Derek could see it, a small thing in the posture, a fraction of tension releasing from the shoulders. All right, he said. Here's what I know about the operational picture. He opened a folder on the desk between them. Marsh, Elliot Marsh, the CFO, is in federal custody. He's talking. The Federal Bureau is leading the investigation, and they're sharing selectively with us. What we know is that Marsh had a financial arrangement with a third party, someone who wanted control of Holloway Group's liquidity positions during a leadership transition. The kidnapping was meant to create a negotiating situation that would force a board emergency. 3 other members of the executive team have been identified as either complicit or compromised to some degree. We don't have the full picture on the third party. Derek looked at the folder, which means whoever funded Fell's operation is still in business. Correct. Webb closed the folder. Ms. Holloway is choosing to continue running the company through this. She's not going into protective custody. She's not relocating. She won't hear of it. She believes that disappearing sends the wrong message to the market and to whatever's left of her board. He paused. I think she's wrong about that. But she's the principal, Derek said. She's the principal, Webb agreed with the weariness of a man who has had this conversation with himself multiple times. So we work with the situation we have, not the one we'd prefer. They spent the next 2 hours going through the operational specifics, entrance and exit protocols, vehicle rotation, communication procedures, the revised surveillance coverage that Webb's team was implementing to close the gap that had been exploited. Derek asked questions that were specific and practical. Webb answered them directly. By the end of the second hour, the stiffness had gone out of the room, and they were working the problem together in the flat, functional language of 2 people who both understood what the problem actually was. One more thing, Webb said, as Derek was standing to leave. Your shoulder. Derek looked at him. You took an impact in the parking structure. I saw it on the camera review. The roll. The way you came up slightly favored on the left side. If you're working as her personal protection, I need to know your physical status is reliable. It's an old injury, Derek said. It flared. It's manageable. That's not the same as reliable. No, Derek said. It's not. I'll get it looked at. He did, that afternoon, at a clinic in Murray Hill that a friend from his unit had recommended years ago, a doctor named Falk, who had done a lot of work with veterans and who examined Derek's shoulder with the thorough, practical manner of someone who had seen this specific kind of damage before. Rotator cuff, old tear that was never fully rehabbed, Falk said, pressing along the joint with his fingertips. You've been compensating for it so long you probably don't notice most of the time. Acute impact re-aggravated it. You're not going to make it worse by using it in the next few weeks. It's going to hurt, but it's stable. Ice, ibuprofen. Don't do anything with your left arm above shoulder height if you can avoid it. And if I can't avoid it? Falk looked at him in the way of a man who had heard that question phrased exactly that way before. Then it's going to hurt more than it does now, and you ice it again after, and we talk about the surgical option when this is over, whatever this is. Fair enough, Derek said. He paid the bill, which was less than he'd expected and more than he'd hoped, and took the subway back to Queens to pick up Lucas. Lucas had had a complicated day involving a disagreement with Cody, the recurring antagonist of his classroom social life, about whether a brachiosaurus could beat a triceratops in a fight, which Lucas maintained was not even a real question because they ate different food and would never have been in competition, and Cody had called this boring, and Lucas had found this profoundly unjust. Derek listened to all of this on the walk from school to the subway and said at appropriate intervals, "That makes sense," and "Yeah, Cody sounds like he's not thinking about the ecology," and "You're not wrong about the food source thing," and watched his son's shoulders gradually drop from around his ears back to where they belonged. "Dad," Lucas said as they waited for the train. Are you going back to the job? Yeah, Derek said, starting tomorrow. Lucas processed this. The same lady? Same lady. Is she going to be nicer? Derek thought about Vanessa Holloway at 6:45 the next morning, what that would look like, what version of herself she would have assembled by then. I think she's working on it, he said. That's good, Lucas said, with the generous pragmatism of someone who had not yet decided that people couldn't change. As long as she doesn't fire you again. We talked about that, Derek said. Good, Lucas said, and the train came and that was the end of it. He was at the curb outside Vanessa's building at 6:42 the next morning, 3 minutes earlier than usual, with the Escalade, which Webb's team had swept and cleared the night before, a new protocol, idling at the curb in the thin gray light of a Tuesday that had not yet decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Vanessa came through the lobby doors at 6:58. She was dressed the way she always was, blazer, trousers, heels, but something in the pace was different. Not slower exactly, more deliberate, like she was moving through the morning rather than through it. She stopped when she reached the car. Derek had the door open. She looked at him. Actually looked. Not the practiced non-acknowledgement of the previous 11 months. And she said, Good morning. Good morning, Ms. Holloway. A pause. Thank you for being here. It's the job, he said. She nodded and got in, and he closed the door and came around and got behind the wheel and pulled into traffic. And she didn't say anything else for the first 5 minutes. But it was a different kind of silence than the one he'd driven through for 11 months. Less like absence and more like the particular quiet of someone trying to change a habit they've had for so long it's become architectural, built into how they move through a day, holding up parts of the structure they've constructed around themselves. He took the primary route. 7th Avenue was clear. At the third light, she said without looking up from her phone, Reyes called me last night. What did she say? They've identified a second person inside the company, someone in the legal department, a paralegal who was passing scheduling information, nothing major on its own, just patterns, routine movements. But combined with what Marsh was providing, she paused. It was enough to build a targeting package. Is the paralegal in custody? As of this morning. She put the phone down, looked out the window. I've been running this company since I was 26 years old. I thought I understood it. I thought I understood the people in it. A pause. It turns out I understood the spreadsheet version of my company. The actual version is apparently more complicated. Derek said nothing because she wasn't asking for a response. She was saying something she'd been holding and needed to put somewhere. Philip is terrified of me, she said. I found that out yesterday. Not from him. From someone else. He's been with me for 2 years and he's been terrified the entire time and I had no idea. She said it without self-pity, more like someone reading back a diagnostic and not enjoying the results. I always thought I created a high-performance environment. Turns out there's a difference between high performance and just everyone being afraid to tell you things. That's a hard thing to see about yourself, Derek said. Yes, she said. It is. She picked up her phone again, put it back down. I'm going to change some things. How the company runs. How I run. She glanced at the rearview mirror. Not at him exactly, more at the space where he was. I don't know how to do that yet, but I'm going to. He navigated the Escalade through a left turn, checked his mirrors in the sequence Webb's team had standardized for the new protocol. That's usually how it starts, he said, knowing you don't know yet. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is that from something? Something someone told me once, he said. Someone smart. She didn't ask who. He didn't offer it. They pulled up to the Holloway Group building at 7:04, 2 minutes behind the revised schedule, which accounted for the new security protocol at the entrance. Webb had 2 people on the curb now, one watching the street, one managing the approach. Derek noted their positions, noted the sight lines, noted the improvement. He came around and opened her door. She got out and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building with her name on it, and there was something in her face that hadn't been there before. Not uncertainty exactly, but a kind of reckoning, like she was looking at something she'd built and seen for the first time, both what it was and what it wasn't. Cross, she said. Yes. The man who got away, Fell's supervisor, the person who organized this from the outside. She looked at him. If they try again, then we handle it, Derek said. That's what we're here for. She nodded, went inside. He stood by the vehicle for a moment, watching Webb's people do their checks, watching the street, running the automatic inventory his eyes did every time he stood in a new position. Entrances, angles, movement patterns, anything that didn't fit the established rhythm of the block. Everything looked clean. For now. He'd been back on the job for exactly 47 minutes. The morning passed without incident, which Derek treated with the same attention he gave to mornings that didn't. Incident-free environments were not the same as safe environments. They were just environments where the thing hadn't happened yet. And the difference mattered enormously if you were in the business of preventing things from happening. He sat with Webb's team during Vanessa's 11 o'clock board meeting, an emergency session that had been called to address the Marsh situation and its implications for the company's governance. Derek wasn't in the room. He was in the corridor outside with a clear view of the 2 access points and a radio earpiece connected to Webb's channel. The meeting ran 40 minutes over schedule, which was the kind of detail that created predictability. And predictability created vulnerability, and he made a note to mention it to Webb. At 1:15, Vanessa came out of the meeting looking like someone who had been in a boxing match that had been technically declared a draw, but had felt like a loss. She had the compressed, contained look of a person who is not going to process something until they're somewhere private. Philip appeared at her elbow with a tablet and a look of focused attentiveness. She took the tablet, scrolled, handed it back, said something Derek couldn't hear, and Philip nodded and retreated. She looked over at Derek. "I need 20 minutes, she said. "My office." "All right." He did a sweep of the executive floor. Not the whole floor, just the relevant zones, the corridors between the elevator bank and her office, the office itself, the small conference room adjacent to it where she sometimes worked when the main office felt too exposed. Webb's team had already done it, but Derek did it anyway, not because he didn't trust them, but because it was his eyes and his red, and in the category of threats that were still developing and not yet fully understood, he wanted his own data. Everything was clear. He positioned himself outside her office, which had glass panels on either side of the door. Inside, he could see her standing at the window. The same window that looked out at the harbor, the same view, with her arms crossed and her head slightly bowed, doing whatever it was she did when she was alone and didn't have to be the version of herself that ran things. He wasn't trying to observe her. He was watching the corridor, and she was in his peripheral vision, and what he noticed without meaning to was simply that she looked tired. Not the temporary tired of a long morning, the deeper kind, the kind that accumulates over years of running hard and not stopping and assuming the speed itself was the point. His phone buzzed. "Webb. Federal is requesting a meeting at 2. Reyes and a partner. Can you be in the security office at 1:45? He texted back, "Yes." The 20 minutes passed. Vanessa opened her office door and looked at him. "I'm ready." She had recomposed herself. Not perfectly. There was still something tired around her eyes. But the operational version of her was back, the one that knew what needed doing and moved toward it. He found that he respected it, the ability to absorb something and keep going. It wasn't the same as being fine. It was just the choice to continue, which was a different thing and sometimes a harder one. Detective Reyes arrived at the security office at exactly 2 o'clock with a partner, a federal agent named Corbin, 40-ish, quiet, the kind of quiet that collected information without broadcasting that it was doing so. Reyes had a folder, Corbin had a laptop. "We've made progress on the third-party principal," Reyes said once they were all seated. "The entity that contracted Marcus Fell's team. We're not releasing the name publicly yet. The investigation is ongoing and we don't want to spook anyone before we're in position to act. What I can tell you is that we're talking about a competitor firm, a financial services company that has been trying to acquire Holloway Group's core asset portfolio for about 18 months through legitimate channels that went nowhere." "So they went to other channels," Webb said. "When the acquisition approach stalled, yes." Reyes glanced at Derek. "The plan was, if Vanessa Holloway could be removed from the picture, even temporarily, the board in its current composition was susceptible to a distressed acquisition at a reduced valuation. Marsh was the inside man. He'd been approached about 2 years ago, offered a significant financial arrangement. Vanessa was sitting very still at the end of the table. 2 years, she said. Yes. He sat across from me in that office for 2 years. Yes, Reyes said with the direct, unvarnished empathy of someone who delivered hard facts for a living and had learned that softening them didn't help. I'm sorry, Miss Holloway. That's the reality of it. Vanessa looked at the table, looked back up. What do you need from me? Cooperation on document access, financial records, board communications, internal correspondence from the period Marsh was active. Your legal team is already in contact with ours. We also need you to continue operating as normally as possible. We don't want the principal to know we're this far along. You're using her as bait, Derek said, not accusatorially, just naming what it was. Corbin looked at him. We're asking her to maintain her professional profile while we complete the evidentiary phase. That's what I said, Derek said. Corbin studied him for a moment. Reyes made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh that she decided against. Mr. Cross, Corbin said, your presence on Miss Holloway's detail. Have you been officially contracted through the security firm? He's been contracted through the company directly, Webb said. You have a security license? I do, Derek said. He had obtained it 2 years ago before taking the driving job as a practical measure. He produced his wallet, removed the card, slid it across the table. Corbin looked at it, looked at the name, looked at Derek. Something moved in his face. The same thing that had moved in the police officer's face in the parking structure. The specific recognition. Thomas Derek Cross, he said. Yes. Corbin looked at Reyes. Reyes was looking at the folder. We're familiar with your service record, Corbin said, which was a careful sentence that contained more than its words. All right, Derek said. It's a thorough record, Corbin said. I'm aware of what I did, Derek said, not harshly, just closing the door on that hallway before the conversation went down it. I'm here about what needs doing now. What's the timeline on the evidentiary phase? They talked through the operational specifics for the next 40 minutes. When the meeting ended, Reyes caught Derek alone for a moment in the corridor while Corbin was packing the laptop. Corbin's not trying to make trouble, she said. He's thorough, that's all. I know, Derek said. Your record, the classified portion, she paused. He pulled what he could. I don't think he expected what he found. Derek looked at her steadily. It's a long time ago. Some of it was less than 2 years ago, she said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a fact she was laying down carefully, the way you lay something down when you're not sure what surface you're putting it on. Derek was quiet for a moment. I left active consulting work when Lucas started school, he said. I needed to be in one place. I needed a life that had a shape he could count on. Reyes nodded. He's how old? 6. She nodded again. Said nothing for a moment, then, You're good at what you do, Mr. Cross? I mean both things, the obvious one and the other one. The other one matters more, he said. I know, she said. That's what I mean. She left. He stood in the corridor for a moment, feeling the weight of that exchange settle into the afternoon around him, the specific discomfort of being seen accurately by someone you've only just met. He'd encountered that twice in his life before, once with Sarah, and once with a commanding officer who had written a recommendation letter that Derek had never read, but had been told contained the phrase uncommonly self-aware for someone doing what he does. He went back to the corridor outside Vanessa's office. Webb's people were doing a rotation change. He watched the sightlines. Everything was where it should be. At 4:30, Vanessa's office door opened and she came out with her jacket on, which meant she was wrapping up for the day. She looked at him. Walk with me to the parking level. He fell into step beside her, slightly behind and to the right, which was the correct position for this kind of principal movement, and which he maintained without making it look like a technique, just a habit of where he stood. In the elevator, she said without preamble, I talked to Philip today. I asked him to be honest with me. It took him about 4 minutes to stop looking like he expected to be fired. She paused. He told me 17 things that he'd been afraid to tell me. Some of them were small. One of them was a significant operational issue that I had no idea about. How did that go? Derek said. Badly at first, she said. Then better. She looked at the elevator doors. He started crying at one point, which was mortifying for both of us. But he finished telling me the thing, so... She shrugged with one shoulder. Progress. The elevator opened into the parking level, which was now equipped with 3 cameras where there had been 2. One guard at the entrance, one at the structural column near the stairwell, and a check-in protocol that added about 40 seconds to every exit, but which had been non-negotiable after the incident. Derek's eyes ran the level in the automatic way they did. Clear, clear, clear. The van's absence from column C was still somehow noticeable, the negative space of it. Vanessa stopped at the Escalade and looked at him. I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. All right. Do you think they'll try again? He looked at her. She was watching him with the directness she brought to everything. Not dramatized, not performing bravery, just a woman who ran a billion-dollar company and had been in a kidnapper's grip 48 hours ago and needed accurate information in order to make decisions. I think the people who organized this haven't gotten what they wanted, Derek said. I think Marsh being in custody changes their timeline, but not their objective. I think there's a window, the period before the federal investigation closes around them, where they might try something faster and less organized than what they had the first time. He paused. Faster and less organized doesn't mean less dangerous. It sometimes means more. She absorbed that, nodded. Okay, she said. Thank you for being straight about it. You asked, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Most people would have softened that. Softening it doesn't change what it is, he said. It just means you're less prepared. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, more like a flicker of recognition, the look of someone who has just heard a version of something they've believed themselves for a long time, but applied to different things. Get home safe, she said. You too, he said. He watched Webb's team move her to the secondary vehicle. The rotation protocol Webb had implemented meant she didn't leave in the same car at the same time by the same route on consecutive days. He watched until the vehicle pulled out of the structure and into the street. Then he stood in the quiet of the parking level for a moment, listening to the city through the open grates in the walls. Somewhere up on the 42nd floor of the building above him, someone had tried to end Vanessa Holloway's control of something she'd spent her adult life building, and had failed, barely, because of a sequence of events that had started with a water main break on 7th Avenue at 6:50 in the morning. Contingency, Derek thought. Everything runs on contingency. You prepare for the thing you can see coming, and you try to be the kind of person who handles the thing you didn't. He picked up his bag and walked to the subway. Lucas was at his mother's. He had a presentation about weather patterns on Thursday that he still hadn't entirely finished, and Derek had promised to help tonight, and the prospect of sitting at the kitchen table explaining cumulus cloud formation to a 6-year-old who would rather be drawing dinosaurs felt, in this specific moment, like the best thing he could think of to do with an evening. He took the stairs out of the parking structure 2 at a time, which made his shoulder remind him of its opinion on the matter, and came out onto the street into the late afternoon light that was doing something generous to the buildings, turning the glass towers amber and rose, and making the city look briefly and without any special effort beautiful. He put his hands in his pockets and walked, and the city moved around him the way it always did, indifferent and alive, and he let it. The weather presentation happened on Thursday, as promised. Derek sat in a row of small plastic chairs designed for people about a third of his size, surrounded by other parents doing the same stoic thing with their knees, and watched Lucas stand at the front of the classroom next to a poster board that had taken 2 evenings and one significant argument about the spelling of cumulonimbus to complete. The poster had clouds on it, drawn by Lucas in the same definitive style as Rex the dinosaur, bold and slightly asymmetrical, and entirely committed to their own reality. Lucas explained cumulus clouds, stratus clouds, and nimbostratus clouds with the focused intensity of someone who had been thoroughly briefed. He said precipitation correctly on the first try, which Derek noted with the private satisfaction of a man who had spent 45 minutes on that word specifically. He stumbled on meteorologist and recovered by saying weather scientist instead, which was, in Derek's view, the correct instinct. When a word isn't working, replace it with the thing it actually means. Afterward, in the hallway, Lucas found him in the crowd with the radar children use for their people and grabbed his hand and looked up and said, Was that good? That was really good, Derek said. Better than Cody's? I didn't see Cody's. Lucas considered this. Mine was better, he said, with the confidence of someone who has made peace with subjectivity. Derek squeezed his hand once, and they went to get juice boxes from the table by the window, and the morning was ordinary and complete, and Derek held it the way he'd learned to hold things like this. Not too tightly, because that changed them, but with enough attention that he'd have it accurately later when he needed it. He was back at the Holloway Group building by noon. The week that followed established a rhythm that was different from the 11 months before it, in ways that were small individually and significant collectively. Vanessa came through the lobby doors each morning and said good morning in a way that was brief but genuine. She told him the route change requests before he made them, rather than reacting to them after, which cost her approximately 30 seconds per morning, and which Derek acknowledged with a nod each time without making a production of it. She stopped treating the security protocols as bureaucratic inconveniences and started treating them as what they were, which was the difference between a person who understood threat and a person who was still arguing with the fact of it. It wasn't transformation. It was adjustment, which is slower and less dramatic and considerably more real. Webb and Derek found a working relationship that functioned the way functional things do, not without friction, but with friction that produced something rather than just heat. Webb ran the organizational picture. Derek ran the immediate one. They briefed each other twice daily. Webb had a habit of over-documenting that Derek privately found excessive and professionally recognized as correct. And Derek had a habit of trusting his instincts in ways that Webb found underdocumented, and which Webb was gradually acknowledging produced accurate results. You made a note about the blue sedan, Webb said one morning in the security office on the 3rd floor. The one you photographed before the incident. 3 sightings, Derek said. Different spots. Consistent sightline. Reyes's team ran the plate. Registered to a shell company out of Delaware. Company was dissolved 6 weeks ago. Webb looked up from the file. Which means whoever was using it knew it would eventually be looked at. They planned for discovery, Derek said. Which means there's a layer above what we're seeing. Yes. Webb set the file down. Corbin called me yesterday. The principal, the firm that contracted, fell. They're a company called Arden Capital, mid-size private equity based in Connecticut, about $12 billion under management. They've been trying to acquire Holloway Group's real estate debt portfolio, specifically about $4 billion in commercial paper that Vanessa's been using as collateral for a major expansion. He paused. The CEO is a man named Gerald Prine, 61, known in the industry, nothing on his record. But Arden Capital has used aggressive tactics before. There's a pattern with 2 previous acquisition targets. Nothing that crossed legal lines clearly enough to act on. But this did, Derek said. This did. Corbin says they're building the case. It's close. Webb folded his hands on the desk. The concern is the window. The closer they get to making the arrest, the more Prine has to lose by waiting. Derek thought about what he told Vanessa 4 days ago. Faster and less organized doesn't mean less dangerous. He'll know they're coming, Derek said. People like Prine always know. They have people watching the same things we're watching. Which means if he moves soon, Webb said. Yes. They looked at each other with the particular understanding of 2 people who have both spent significant portions of their lives trying to stay one step ahead of what could go wrong. I'm changing the morning protocol, Derek said, starting tomorrow. Different vehicle, different pickup time, different entrance to the building. I want her moving in a pattern that doesn't establish itself long enough to be predictable. She won't love the time change, Webb said. No, Derek said. But she'll accept it. He told Vanessa that afternoon. She was in the back of the Escalade on the return trip from a meeting in Midtown, the late afternoon traffic turning the city into a slow crawl that gave conversations more time to breathe than they usually got in her schedule. 5:30, she said. 5:45, Derek said, and the pickup point moves to the side entrance on 61st. That adds 12 minutes to my morning. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city inched. A cab driver somewhere behind them expressed an opinion with his horn. All right, she said. He glanced in the rear view. She was looking out the window, not at anything specific. He'd noticed she did this more than she used to. let her eyes rest on the middle distance rather than always driving them toward the next thing. It was a small change. It probably cost her. How much longer, she said. Not about the traffic. Corbin's building the case. Days, maybe. Could be a week. And in the meantime, we don't give Prine a clean opportunity, Derek said. That's all we can control. She nodded slowly. Then, can I ask you something personal? Sure. She seemed to consider how to frame it. When you were deployed in the teams, did you ever get used to living inside a threat that you couldn't fully resolve? Just existing alongside it? He thought about that honestly, the way he tried to think about questions that deserved it. You don't get used to it exactly, he said. You get fluent in it. You learn to keep it in your peripheral vision without looking at it directly all the time. Because if you look at it directly all the time, you can't see anything else. She was quiet for a moment. That's a hard way to live. It's temporary, he said. This specific thing. It has an end. And the other things, she said, the ones that don't? He looked at the traffic ahead, at the city doing what it did, indifferent and constant. You build things around them, he said, things that are bigger than they are. So the peripheral vision has somewhere better to be. She didn't say anything for a while after that. The traffic moved. They made it back to the building at 6:08, later than usual, the sky doing something complicated with orange and gray above the financial district. She got out, stood by the car for a moment. Your son, she said. The presentation. How did it go? He looked at her. It was the first time she'd asked about Lucas directly. He'd mentioned the presentation once, 11 days ago, when he'd laid out his conditions. He hadn't raised it again. It went well, he said. He explained cumulus clouds very authoritatively. The corner of her mouth moved. How old is he? 6. Does he know what you do? The full version? He knows I keep people safe, Derek said. The full version is a conversation for later. She nodded. You're a good father, she said. You don't have to say anything. I've been paying more attention to people lately. It shows. She went inside. He stood by the vehicle and absorbed that for a moment. The specific, slightly uncomfortable feeling of being seen by someone who is learning how to look. The call came on a Saturday. Derek was in his mother's backyard, which was a narrow strip of urban space that Eleanor had transformed over 20 years into something that defied the soil it was growing in. Tomatoes in October that had no right still being on the vine, a fig tree that had survived 3 winters through what Derek suspected was sheer stubbornness on his mother's part, a section of raised beds that Lucas had partially claimed for purposes that remained unclear but involved a lot of digging. Lucas was currently excavating something near the fig tree with a hand spade, providing a running commentary on what he expected to find. So far, nothing, but he was optimistic. Derek's phone buzzed. Webb. We've got movement, Webb said when Derek picked up. Corbin flagged it. Prine made 2 calls this morning from a burner. They tracked the signal, one to a number associated with a private security contractor, different from Fell's operation, one to Marsh's personal attorney. Derek was already standing up straighter. Marsh's attorney. Yeah, which is interesting because Marsh is in federal custody, and his attorney has no business taking personal calls about his client from the CEO of a competing firm. Webb's voice had the clipped, focused quality of someone who'd shifted into operational mode. Corbin thinks Prine is signaling something to Marsh, possibly trying to coordinate a timeline before the federal case closes. Which means he's moving up his own timeline, Derek said. That's Corbin's read, yes. They're trying to get a judge to sign the arrest warrant today. But today is Saturday, and the federal machinery moves at its own pace on weekends. And Prine knows that too, Derek said. Yes. Derek looked at Lucas, who was holding up a bottle cap he'd found in the dirt and examining it with the gravity of an archaeologist at a significant site. What's Vanessa's location? Derek said. Her apartment. She said she was working from home today. We have building security on. She's got our camera feeds active. A pause. Derek, we don't have a specific threat. This is pattern analysis and inference. I know, Derek said. Call Webb's team for the building. I'm coming in. It's Saturday, Webb said. You've been on since Monday. Call the team, Derek said. He told his mother, who looked at him with the face she made when she was not going to say the things she was thinking, and he kissed Lucas on top of his head. Lucas, absorbed in the bottle cap, said bye, Dad, without looking up, and he took the subway into Manhattan with his bag and the particular focused calm that settled over him when something that had been a probability became something more immediate. He was in the lobby of Vanessa's building by 10:45. The building security team, a two-man outfit that Webb had augmented after the parking structure incident, checked him through. He took the elevator to the 34th floor, which was her floor, and knocked. She answered the door in the kind of clothes that meant she'd actually been working. Reading glasses pushed up on her head, a notepad in her hand, dressed in the casual register that she clearly didn't wear around the office, and which made her look, Derek thought, more like a person than the office version usually did. She looked at him, then at his bag, then at his face. "Tell me," she said. He told her. The calls, the inference, the arrest warrant, the timeline gap. She listened with her arms crossed and her reading glasses still on top of her head, her face doing the thing it did now when she was processing information. A kind of focused stillness that was different from the driven-ahead quality of before, more present, like she was actually in the room with the information rather than already at the next step. "You think he's going to try something today," she said. "I think today or tonight is when the window is most open," Derek said. "The arrest warrant closes it. Before that happens, his options are decreasing. And whatever he tries will be faster than Fell's operation, less resource-intensive, which means less controlled." She nodded. "What do you need?" "To be here. Webb's team on the building. We don't move you until Corbin tells us the warrant is signed." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Come in." The apartment was, he noted, not what he'd expected, though he hadn't specifically formed expectations. It was a good apartment. 34th floor Manhattan, harbor view through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But it was also an apartment where someone actually lived, not staged, not curated. There were books that had been read rather than displayed, a pair of running shoes by the door that had actually been run in, a stack of files on the dining table that had spread in the organic way of working documents rather than arranged for effect. There was a photograph on the bookshelf of a younger Vanessa with a woman who had her same jaw and was laughing at something off camera. "My mother," Vanessa said, following his glance. "She passed 4 years ago." "I'm sorry," Derek said. "She's why I started the company," Vanessa said, setting her notepad on the table. "She worked her whole life for other people and retired with nothing. I decided that wasn't going to be the story." She said it without particular drama, just a fact about why things were what they were. Derek sat up near the window, not visible from outside, the angle wrong for any building across the harbor at this range, but with a clear view of the street below and the building entrance and the approach routes. He put his phone on the windowsill where he could see it and settled in. Vanessa went back to her work at the dining table. They existed in the same space without the awkwardness that might have characterized it 2 weeks ago. The silence was the functional kind, each person doing what they were doing, the awareness of the other present but not demanding. Around noon, she made coffee and brought him a cup without asking if he wanted it, which he found he appreciated, the assumption that he was a person who might want coffee, the lack of ceremony around the offering. "Tell me about your wife," she said. She said it carefully, not intrusively. She'd tested the territory first, he could tell, decided it was something she could ask. "If that's... you don't have to." He looked at the coffee cup. "Her name was Sarah," he said. "She taught 3rd grade in Brooklyn. She was funnier than anyone I've ever known, not in a performing way. She just had a way of seeing things sideways that made them funny without trying." He paused. "She died when Lucas was 18 months old. Brain aneurysm. No warning." Vanessa was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. And then didn't add anything to it, didn't reach for something additional the way people sometimes did when they didn't know what to do with the loss someone had just put in front of them. Just let it be what it was. "Thank you," he said. They were quiet for a moment. "Is that why you left the teams?" she said. "After." "Partly," he said. Lucas needed someone consistent, but also, Sarah was right about something she said before she died, about carrying 2 different versions of myself. I needed to figure out how to be one person. He drank some of the coffee. I'm still working on that. Aren't we all? Vanessa said, with a dryness that was, he thought, probably her version of the same thing. His phone buzzed at 1:47. Webb. Building security flagged a vehicle. Dark SUV, been circling the block 3 times. Plates don't match the registered owner's address. I've got eyes on it. Derek was already moving, away from the window, into the interior of the apartment, away from the sightlines. Stay here, he said. Interior room, away from the windows, the bedroom or the kitchen. Vanessa stood up from the table without argument. What is it? Probably nothing, he said, which was the correct thing to say to a principal who needed to remain functional and calm, and it was also at least 30% true. He pressed the earpiece into place, pulled his phone. Webb, what's the vehicle doing? Still circling, slowed on the 3rd pass near the service entrance. 2 occupants visible. A pause. Derek, we've got a second thing. Lobby security just flagged a man who came in as a maintenance worker. Said he was here for a building systems check. Building management has no record of a scheduled inspection. Derek's jaw tightened. 2-point operation. Vehicle as distraction or extraction. Interior contact as primary. What floor is the maintenance man on? He went up the service elevator. We lost him at 32. 2 floors below. Lock the service elevator, Derek said. Both stairwells, security on each. I need someone in the lobby confirming the vehicle position every 60 seconds. Where's Corbin? I've been trying to reach him for 20 minutes. His office says he's with the judge. Reyes? On. Get her on with me, Derek said. He put himself between Vanessa and the apartment door. She was standing in the kitchen doorway. She'd gone there herself, read the situation, made the right call without being told twice. She looked at him with the particular focused expression she'd been developing over the past 2 weeks, the one that processed information without letting it become panic. There's a man in the building, she said. Not a question. 2 floors below. We don't know yet if he's here for me, she said. Yes. She nodded once. What do I do? Stay in the kitchen, low, away from the door. If I tell you to go into the pantry, you go immediately, no questions, and you stay there until I tell you it's clear. Understand? Yes. Vanessa. He used her first name without thinking, and something in her expression registered it. Not the name itself, but the directness of it, the way it meant I need you to be here with me right now, all the way. Nod if you understand. She nodded. He positioned himself beside the apartment door, not behind it, beside it, off the hinge side where a door opening inward wouldn't give him away. Webb was in his ear. Reyes was coming on. The vehicle had stopped on the service street side. 1 occupant still in it, 1 unaccounted for. The hallway outside was quiet. 30 seconds passed. 60. His phone buzzed silently on his wrist. Webb's signal, which meant something had changed. He pressed his earpiece. Talk to me. Stairwell camera on 33 just went dark, Webb said. Manual disabling, someone cut the connection at the junction box. That's not a maintenance check. Position? Derek said. 33 landing, east stairwell, which puts him 1 floor below and 1 staircase over from your position. Derek ran the building layout he'd memorized 3 days ago when he'd first started thinking about this scenario. East stairwell came out into the 34th floor corridor at the far end from the elevator bank. Vanessa's apartment was Unit 34C, which was mid-corridor, which meant the approach from the east stairwell gave someone about 40 feet of open corridor. He made a decision. Webb, I need your building security person on the 34th floor at the west end of the corridor in 90 seconds. Not engaging. Positioning. I need the corridor covered at both ends. He's 2 floors down, Webb said. Getting there. Reyes, Derek said. I'm here, Reyes said through the earpiece, and the steadiness of her voice was something he registered and was glad of. I need a unit to the building now. I don't have a confirmed threat yet, but the pattern is, I've already got people rolling, she said. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. He looked at the kitchen doorway. Vanessa was where he'd told her to be. Crouched near the counter, below the sightline of the kitchen window, watching him. He held up 3 fingers. She understood. She nodded. The hallway outside was still quiet. Then it wasn't. The sound was small and specific, the soft mechanical sound of something interacting with the lock on the apartment door. Not a key. Something else. Someone who knew what they were doing with the door, working it from the outside with the unhurried confidence of a person who had done it before and expected to be on the other side in under 30 seconds. Derek flattened himself against the wall beside the door frame. He thought, in the fragment of a second that exists between decisions, about the parking structure, about 3 men down, 1 van, 1 who got away, about the fact that the man who had gotten away, Marcus Fell, was in federal custody, and this was someone else, a different layer, Gerald Prine's contingency for when the contingency failed. The door opened. The man who came through it was careful. He came in low and fast and kept to the hinge side, which was the right instinct and would have been effective against most people. It was not effective against Derek, who was not on the hinge side and who was already moving before the door had finished its arc. What followed lasted approximately 11 seconds. The man was good, better trained than 2 of the 3 in the parking structure, more controlled, someone who fought back in a way that was technical rather than reactive. He got Derek's shoulder, the bad one, on the second exchange, a deliberate move, which meant he'd been briefed, which meant Prine's intelligence on Derek was better than Derek had assumed. The white bolt through his vision was the same as before, and the same as the time before that, a familiar companion by now, and he did what he'd done the previous times, filed it for later and kept moving. The man ended up against the wall beside the window. His weapon was on the floor 3 feet away. His wrist was in a position that made reaching for it a non-option. He was breathing hard and looking at Derek with an expression that had moved through several phases in 11 seconds and had arrived at a kind of involuntary professional respect that Derek recognized. "Don't," Derek said. "Simple." The man stopped. Reyes came through the apartment door 40 seconds later with 2 uniformed officers behind her. She looked at the man against the wall, looked at Derek, looked at the weapon on the floor, and said, "You all right?" "Shoulder," Derek said. "You said that last time." "It keeps coming up," he said. Vanessa had come out of the kitchen. She was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, her hand on the door frame, looking at the man against the wall with an expression Derek couldn't easily classify. It wasn't fear. She'd moved past that version of herself somewhere in the past 2 weeks. It was something more complicated. The look of someone who is directly confronting the fact that someone wanted to remove her from the world and sent people to do it, and is deciding in real time what that means to them. "Ms. Holloway," Reyes said, "are you hurt?" "No," Vanessa said. "I'm fine." And then, more quietly, looking at Derek, "You're not." "I'm functional," he said. "That's also not the same thing as fine," she said. He almost smiled. The officers took the man into custody. Reyes spent 20 minutes on her phone in the hallway, and when she came back in, she had the look of someone delivering news that was still arriving from multiple directions simultaneously. "Corbin got the warrant," she said, "signed 40 minutes ago. Federal agents are at Prine's Connecticut estate as of about 15 minutes ago." She paused. "Prine wasn't there. He was in the city." A longer pause. "He was in the vehicle outside, the one Webb flagged." The room was quiet for a moment. "He came himself," Vanessa said. "We think he panicked," Reyes said. "When the warrant moved faster than he expected, he made a personal decision, which was not a smart one." "Is he in custody?" Derek said. "As of 12 minutes ago, yes. The second man in the vehicle tried to run. He didn't get far." She looked at Vanessa. "It's over, Ms. Holloway. The organized threat, Prine, Fell's operation, Marsh inside the company. The infrastructure is dismantled. There may be loose ends, but the central operation is finished." Vanessa sat down on the couch, not dramatically, just sat, the way you sit when your legs have been holding a weight for a long time and have decided, now that the reason is past, to stop. She put her hands in her lap and looked at them. Derek sat in the chair across from her. His shoulder was making its opinion very clearly known, and he was managing it by giving it limited attention, which was not a long-term strategy but was sufficient for the current moment. "It's over," Vanessa said, to herself as much as anyone. "The primary threat," Derek said. "Yes." She looked at him. "But you're going to stay careful." It's what I do, he said. She nodded slowly, then she said, I owe you an explanation. For the morning I fired you, not an apology. I've given you that. An explanation. She looked at her hands. I was raised by a woman who worked herself to the bone for people who never saw her. She was invisible to them. I decided when I started this company that I was never going to be invisible, that I was going to be seen, loudly, completely, undeniably. She paused. I confused that with making sure other people weren't invisible the way she was. I thought being seen meant being the loudest. I didn't understand that seeing other people is a different skill, and I'd never learned it. Derek was quiet. You changed the route, she said, and I saw it as someone doing something without my permission. I didn't see a person making a good decision on my behalf because he was paying attention. I saw an absence of performance. She paused. Because performance was what I understood. Visibility. Volume. Another pause. I fired you because you were quiet and I mistook quiet for empty. A lot of people do, Derek said. I know, she said. I shouldn't have. Especially not me. He sat with that for a moment. Outside, the city was doing its Saturday afternoon thing. The ferry crossing the harbor, a helicopter crossing far above. The muffled sound of the street below, which had returned to its ordinary rhythms now that the police units were folding back into it. You were honest just now, Derek said. About why? Yes. That's not a small thing, he said. A lot of people figure out they were wrong and stop there. They don't go the next step and try to understand why. She looked at him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to be accurate, he said. You can decide whether it makes you feel better. For the second time, the corner of her mouth moved in a way that almost became something. You have a very particular way of giving someone a compliment, she said. I've been told, he said. Reyes wrapped up her preliminary interview with Vanessa at around 4 o'clock, took Derek's account for the second time in a week with the same professional thoroughness as the first, and left them both with the instruction to be available for follow-up and the acknowledgement that, given everything, they both probably needed to go sit somewhere quiet. After she left, Derek called Webb and ran through the status. Building security status, vehicle reports, confirmation that the operational threat had been formally neutralized from Corbin's team. Webb sounded like a man who hadn't slept well in 2 weeks and had just been given permission to try. Take the weekend, Derek said. You too, Webb said. He called his mother. Lucas answered, which meant Eleanor had let him answer the phone, which she only did when she was in the kitchen and couldn't get to it before he did. Dad, Grandma said you had to work, but I found something in the garden. What did you find? A rock, Lucas said. But it's a special rock. It has lines on it. Lines like what? Like a fossil, maybe, Lucas said. Or like a really cool regular rock. Grandma says it's probably a regular rock, but I think it's a fossil. We'll look it up when I get home, Derek said. You're coming home? Yeah, bud, I'm coming home. Okay. A pause. Was today bad? Derek looked at the apartment around him, at the window with the harbor view, at the reading glasses still on top of Vanessa's head where she'd pushed them 3 hours ago and never moved them, at his bag by the door with the things in it he'd needed and used and was going to go home and put away again. It was a lot, he said, but it's okay now. Good, Lucas said, with the simple finality of someone who considers this matter resolved. Can we have pasta tonight? Grandma said maybe pasta. Pasta sounds perfect, Derek said. He hung up. Vanessa was watching him from the couch and, not intrusively, just the natural attention of someone who is in the same room and has nothing left to manage. Go home, she said. Please. Webb's team has the building. I know. Go home to your son. A pause. That's not optional. That was a condition you set when you came back, and I'm holding you to it. He looked at her for a moment. At the woman who had, in 2 weeks, shifted something in herself. Not completely, not without cost, not in the clean way that stories sometimes wanted things to shift, but genuinely in the way that actually mattered, which was one hard conversation at a time, one moment of paying attention where before she hadn't. I'll be back Monday, he said. 6:45, she said. 5:45, he said. Side entrance. She made a face. Right, she said. 5:45. He picked up his bag, checked the corridor out of habit, and took the elevator down. In the lobby, he nodded to the building security team and pushed through the glass doors onto the sidewalk. The afternoon had softened into early evening, the light going golden the way it did in October in this city, the harbor visible between buildings 2 blocks south, the whole long ordinary evening stretching out ahead of him in the direction of Queens, and a 6-year-old with a rock that was probably not a fossil, but which they were going to look up anyway because that was the kind of thing you did. Not because it was important, but because it was true that your kid found a rock and thought it was something special, and you had the time to sit with him and find out. He walked toward the subway, his shoulder complaining with each step in a way that he made a mental note to stop ignoring, the city moving around him in its continuous way, and he thought about what his mother had said. Build things around it, things that are bigger. He had. He was. He went home. The rock was not a fossil. Derek and Lucas spent 40 minutes on Saturday evening with Eleanor's laptop going through geological images with the focused energy of 2 people who have committed to finding an answer and the conclusion they reached. Through a process that involved 3 different search queries, one wrong turn into a website about gemstones that Lucas found very interesting for unrelated reasons, and a photograph comparison that Lucas conducted with genuine scientific rigor was that the rock was a piece of banded shale, which was common in the northeastern United States, and which had been formed by sedimentary compression over approximately 300 million years. Lucas received this information with the expression of someone reconciling themselves to a reality that was less dramatic than hoped, but more interesting than expected. 300 million years, he said. Give or take, Derek said. Lucas looked at the rock in his hand, turned it over. That's still pretty old. That's extremely old, Derek said. Older than you. Significantly older than me. Lucas decided the rock was still worth keeping, which Derek had expected. It went on the nightstand next to Rex. The nightstand was becoming a museum of things Lucas had determined were significant, and Derek had decided a long time ago that the curation of that collection was entirely Lucas's business. After Lucas was in bed, Derek sat at the kitchen table with his mother and told her the full version of the week. The operational details, the Saturday incident, Prine in custody, the warrant, all of it. Eleanor listened with her hands around a mug, and her face doing the particular work it did when she was managing the distance between what she felt about what she was hearing and what she was going to say about it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Your shoulder, she said. I have an appointment Monday, he said. Falk. Surgical option, she said. Maybe. After things settle. She nodded slowly. And the woman, Vanessa. She's safe, he said. Primary threat is resolved. Prine is in federal custody. Fell is already charged. Marsh is cooperating with the prosecution. Webb's team continues normal protective protocols. The immediate crisis is done. Eleanor looked at him. And you, she said. Are you settled? He thought about that. What settled meant. What it actually felt like when it applied. He thought about the apartment on Saturday, the reading glasses on top of Vanessa's head, the harbor through the window, sitting across from each other in a silence that had stopped requiring management. He thought about Lucas's rock on the nightstand. He thought about Sarah's voice in the kitchen of the Brooklyn apartment saying they're the same person in different clothes. Getting there, he said. His mother put her hand briefly over his, the way she'd done his whole life when she'd reached the end of what words could usefully do, and then she picked up her mug and went to bed. He sat alone in the kitchen for a while, which was becoming a habit, and let the week settle into whatever shape it was going to permanently take. The surgery happened 3 weeks later. Not immediately. There was a consultation with Falk, then a second opinion from an orthopedic specialist in Midtown that Falk recommended. Then a scheduling conversation that involved Derek explaining his situation and the specialist explaining that the situation Derek was describing suggested the repair needed to happen sooner rather than later if he wanted full function in 5 years. Derek processed this with the same practical acceptance he applied to most things that were true and inconvenient, told Webb he'd need 2 weeks, and told Vanessa at 6:45 on a Tuesday in the back of the Escalade matter-of-factly, the way he told her things that affected her schedule. She was quiet for a moment. 2 weeks, she said. Webb's team is fully operational. Carter is the right person to run it in my absence. You'll be fine. I know I'll be fine, she said, with a slight edge that was not directed at him exactly, more at the category of statement. I'm not worried about being fine. He glanced in the rear view. She was looking out the window. How's the shoulder now? She said. Currently, not clinically. It works, he said. It complains. You've been managing it for weeks, she said, while doing this job. Yes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He thought about that honestly. Because it wasn't affecting my ability to do the job, he said, and because you had enough to manage. She turned from the window and looked at the rear view, at his reflection in it, with the particular directness she'd been developing since before the Saturday incident, the one that meant she was going to say a thing she'd been thinking about carefully. I'd like you to stop deciding what I can and can't manage, she said. Not operationally, personally. If something is happening with you, with your shoulder, with anything, I'd rather know. The light ahead turned red. He stopped. Okay, he said. I mean it. I know you do, he said. And then, because she had earned the reciprocal honesty, the shoulder has hurt every day since the parking structure, some days more than others. It's been manageable. The surgical repair will resolve it and leave me with better long-term function, which is the correct decision and which I should have made 2 weeks ago. The reason I didn't is probably that stopping for 2 weeks felt uncomfortable when things were still unsettled. She absorbed that. The light turned green. Thank you, she said, for the actual answer. You asked for it, he said. They rode the rest of the way in the comfortable quiet that had become one of the more unexpected things about the past month. The specific ease of two people who had agreed without formal negotiation to be honest with each other even when it was mildly inconvenient. The surgery went as surgeries go. Clinically successful, personally tedious. Derek spent 2 days in the hospital, which he found difficult not because of the pain, but because hospital beds were designed for sleeping and he was constitutionally bad at sleeping in places where he hadn't cleared the exits. Lucas visited on the second day with Eleanor, carrying a drawing he'd made of Derek in a hospital bed, which bore a reasonable resemblance to a person and an unreasonable resemblance to a hot dog, but which Derek received with full ceremony and asked Eleanor to put on the refrigerator. Lucas spent about 15 minutes being carefully solemn, the way children are solemn in hospitals because some adult has told them to behave, and then abandoned this approach entirely in favor of telling Derek about an incident with Cody that had involved a handball and a misunderstanding about the rules. A narrative that took 11 minutes and which Derek followed with complete attention despite the fact that the painkillers had given the room a slightly liquid quality. Are you in pain? Lucas asked, at some point, looking at his father's face with the forensic directness he brought to things he actually needed to know. Some, Derek said. Lucas thought about this. Is it worse than when you hurt your shoulder the first time? The first time was a long time ago, Derek said. But is it? A little, Derek said. But this time they're fixing it, so after it heals it'll be better than before either time. Lucas processed the logic of this, found it acceptable, and returned to the handball story. Derek came home on a Thursday. Webb ran the security operation. Carter Webb was, as Derek had said, the right person for it, thorough, experienced, and operating without the particular friction that came from not knowing your own capabilities. Derek checked in once a day by phone, briefly, not to manage but to stay current, and Webb gave him clean operational reports with the tone of a man who was handling things and knew it. Vanessa sent a text on his first day home. How's recovery? He typed back. Boring. Shoulder less angry. Lucas drew me in the hospital and I look like a hot dog. A pause, then, I'd like to see that drawing. He took a photo of it and sent it. Her response was a single line. The resemblance is really quite strong. He found himself almost laughing, which was not a thing he'd expected to do while sitting on his mother's couch with his arm in a sling, and which surprised him enough that he sat with it for a moment, the specific warmth of an unexpected moment of being genuinely amused by another person. He returned to work on a Monday, which was 2 days earlier than Falk's official recommendation. Falk expressed his view on this with the measured exasperation of a doctor who has learned which patients are going to do what they're going to do and has adjusted his approach to damage limitation accordingly. Derek promised to be careful with the surgical site, which was true, and not to do anything that would compromise the repair, which was conditionally true pending circumstances. He was at the curb outside Vanessa's building at 5:43. She came through the side entrance at 5:46 and stopped when she saw him. "You're early," she said. "2 days early," she said. "Falk cleared you?" He expressed a view. "Derek?" "I'm cleared to drive," he said. "Light duty. No tactical engagement for another 3 weeks." She looked at him. "And you think that's sufficient?" "The primary threat is resolved. The operational environment is stable. I'm here to drive and observe, not engage." He held the door open. "Good morning, Ms. Holloway." She looked at him for another moment with the expression she got when she was deciding whether to push and had concluded it wasn't worth the morning. She got in. They rode toward the financial district in the early dark of a November morning, the city quiet in that particular way it got before 7. Not empty, it was never empty, but slower, the night shift handing off to the day shift in the gradual way of things that have been running continuously for a long time. "I did something while you were out," Vanessa said at the first light. "What did you do?" "I met with every department head individually, not about performance, not about targets." She paused. "I asked each one of them to tell me something about their team that they thought I didn't know, something they'd been afraid to bring up." He watched the light. "How did that go?" "The first 3 thought it was a test," she said, "gave me careful political answers. The 4th one, her name is Diana, she runs the analytics team, she's been with the company for 5 years. She told me 3 things in a row and then started crying because she thought she was going to be fired for saying them." "Was she?" "Obviously not." A pause. "One of the things she said was that her team had identified a risk in the Marsh-related accounts 18 months ago and flagged it internally, and it never went anywhere. And she'd assumed I'd seen it and made a different call, and she hadn't felt safe questioning that assumption." The light changed. He drove. "If I'd known that," Vanessa said, 18 months ago, if someone had felt safe enough to bring it to me directly, Marsh's operation might have been found before it became what it became." She said it in the flat way of someone who has looked at a fact they don't like until they can see it clearly. "People around me had information I needed, and they were too afraid to give it to me, and I created that. Not intentionally, but I created it." "What did you do with the information?" Derek said. "I thanked Diana," she said, "and I'm conducting a full review of how internal flagging works. And I'm doing the same conversation with every department head and taking actual notes and following up." She paused. "And I've started doing something Philip suggested, which felt humiliating at first and which I've decided to just accept was necessary. He sends me a weekly summary of what people in the company are actually worried about, anonymized. So I know what the room is actually feeling versus what it tells me." "How did Philip suggest that?" "I asked him to tell me things he'd been afraid to tell me," she said. "That was number 4 on his list. He had a list." She said it with something in her voice that was not quite humor and not quite anything else, more like the specific surprise quality of a person who has discovered that they were surrounded by people with things to say, and they'd just never made it safe to say them. Derek said nothing because there was nothing that needed adding to that. It was its own complete thing. They arrived at the building at 6:51. Webb's team was in position. The building had the settled look of something that had been running smoothly for several weeks. The protocols in place and normalized, the adjustment period over. Raymond was on the security desk and gave Derek the nod he always gave, and Derek nodded back. And that was the morning. The federal case against Gerald Prine developed through November and into December with the methodical momentum of a prosecution that had more evidence than it needed. Corbin's team had, in addition to the conspiracy and kidnapping charges, built a financial fraud case that touched 3 other companies and 2 offshore structures that had existed for years. Marcus Fell, already in custody, entered into a cooperation agreement. Elliot Marsh continued to cooperate with the specific enthusiasm of a man who has calculated his options accurately. The second person inside the company, The paralegal in the legal department, a 28-year-old named Tyler who had been recruited by Marsh 18 months ago with the offer of a debt payoff, pled guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for his testimony. Derek followed the case in the way he followed things that were adjacent to his operational environment, accurately, without obsession, updating his picture when the facts updated. He gave testimony in a federal deposition in November, a 3-hour session with Corbin's team that covered the parking structure incident in precise operational detail and which Corbin received with the focused attention of a man adding final pieces to something he'd been building for months. Afterward, in the corridor outside the deposition room, Corbin stopped Derek. "I want to tell you something off the record," Corbin said. He had the slightly loosened quality of a man who was near the end of a long case and could see where it was going. "The parking structure. The way you handled Fell's team. No shots fired, no civilian casualties, contained engagement in an enclosed space. There are people in my building who've been reviewing that footage for training purposes." Derek looked at him. "I hope it's useful," he said. "It is." Corbin paused. "I also want to say, and this isn't official, this is me. What you did for Ms. Holloway, first in the parking structure and then on Saturday. She told me you came in on your day off because you read a threat pattern and made a call. That's not a job. That's something else." "It was the right thing to do," Derek said. "That's all it was." Corbin looked at him for a moment with the evaluating expression of a man who has spent a career trying to read people. "Yeah," he said. "That's what she said you'd say." December arrived the way December arrived in New York. Abruptly, the city suddenly hung with lights and the cold acquiring an edge that felt intentional rather than seasonal. Derek drove Vanessa to end-of-year board meetings and investor calls and the various obligations that accumulated at the close of a year that had contained, by any measure, more than the average quantity of consequential events. The company's governance had been restructured. 3 board members had resigned. 2 were under separate investigation. Vanessa had brought in 2 new independent directors with backgrounds in operational oversight, which was a choice that said something about what she was trying to build. The kind of structure that could check itself. It wasn't comfortable. She mentioned once, in the car, that the new directors asked hard questions and that she was still getting used to that, to having people in the room who pushed back. But she said it with the tone of someone who had decided that discomfort was a reasonable price for accuracy. She also promoted Philip. She told Derek about it on a Wednesday morning, slightly ahead of schedule, in the way she sometimes mentioned things now that had no operational significance, but which she wanted to say. "Operations coordinator," she said, "with direct access to my schedule and a standing invitation to tell me when he thinks I'm wrong." "How did he react?" Derek said. "He cried again," she said, "which I'm beginning to understand is just how Philip processes large positive emotions." "That's not a bad way to process them," Derek said. She was quiet for a moment. "He's very good at his job," she said. "He was good at it before. I didn't see it. I saw someone managing me well. I didn't see someone with actual capability and ideas and a perspective that was valuable." A pause. "I was looking at what people did for me instead of who they were." "Most people do," Derek said. "I know," she said. "I'm trying to do it less." The Friday before Christmas, Vanessa asked him something she had clearly been deciding whether to ask for a while. They were in the car, returning from a morning meeting, the city doing its December thing, crowded and lit and smelling of pretzels and cold air, and she said, without the usual lead-in, "Would it be inappropriate to invite you and your son to the company holiday party?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not as staff," she said. "I know how that sounds. I mean, as... I don't know what word to use. As people I'd like to be in the same room with." She paused. "Lucas is welcome. There's a family section. Eleanor, too, if she'd like." Derek thought about it. About the line between professional and whatever the thing was that existed now. Not friendship exactly, because that word was too easy and too small for something that had been built out of 2 people having their assumptions about each other demolished, and then choosing to stay anyway. Some kind of mutual, honest regard, something that had earned its shape. "I'll ask Lucas," he said. Lucas, informed that there was a party with food and the possibility of other kids, and the option of a tie which he could choose himself, confirmed his attendance with an enthusiasm that settled the matter. The party was on a Thursday evening in the company's top-floor event space, which had the harbor view from 42 floors up and which had been decorated by someone with taste and a reasonable budget. Understated, well-lit, the kind of space that made people look like the best version of themselves in it. Derek arrived with Lucas and Eleanor at 6:30, which was early, which was his habit. Lucas was wearing a navy tie that he had selected himself and which he was treating with great ceremony. Eleanor was wearing the dark red dress she wore to things she considered worth dressing for, which Derek noted as its own form of endorsement. Vanessa found them near the window at 6:52. She was in a dark green dress that was different from her professional register. Still precise, still her, but with the specific ease of a person who has, for one evening, given themselves permission to be at a party instead of running one. She looked at Lucas first, directly at him, the way she'd been learning to look at people without the filter of what they were there for or what role they served. "You must be Lucas," she said. Lucas looked at her with the frank assessment of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned the social convention of pretending to assess gradually. "You're the lady who fired my dad," he said. Eleanor made a sound. Derek said nothing because there was nothing to add to that. Vanessa held Lucas's gaze. "I am," she said. "That was a mistake. I'm sorry about it." Lucas considered this apology with appropriate gravity. "Did you tell my dad that?" "I did." "And he came back anyway?" "He did." Lucas nodded, apparently satisfied that the sequence had resolved correctly. "Okay," he said. Then, "Do you have a dog?" "I don't," she said. "We don't either," Lucas said. "But I want one. Dad says maybe when I'm 7. Vanessa glanced at Derek. Derek looked at the harbor. "That seems reasonable," she said to Lucas. "That's what I said," Lucas said. Eleanor extended her hand. "Eleanor Cross," she said. "Derek's mother." Vanessa shook it. "Vanessa Holloway. Thank you for coming." Eleanor looked at her. The specific, thorough look of a woman who has been reading people for 61 years and has gotten good at it. "Thank you for asking us," she said. It was not a complicated sentence, but Eleanor Cross deployed gratitude the way she deployed most things, specifically and without excess, which meant when she offered it, the weight was real. Something in Vanessa's face registered that. "I've been trying to do more of that," Vanessa said quietly. "Asking." "I can see that," Eleanor said, and then moved toward the food table, because Eleanor had also learned that some moments were better left to themselves. Derek stood beside Vanessa for a moment, the two of them looking out at the harbor, which at 42 floors in December dark was something extraordinary. The lights of Brooklyn across the water, the bridge lit up, the whole liquid dark of the upper bay doing something that painters had been trying to capture for 200 years. Lucas had found another child near the food table and was engaged in a rapid-onset friendship negotiation that seemed to be going well based on the volume. "He's remarkable," Vanessa said. "He's 6, Derek said. He's also currently explaining why Brachiosaurus and Triceratops would never fight, which is a topic he has very strong feelings about." "He gets that from you," she said. "The feelings or the explanation?" "The certainty," she said. "The way he's just certain about what he knows and not pretending otherwise." Derek looked at his son across the room, the tie slightly askew already, the new friend now nodding along with increasing conviction to whatever Lucas was saying, Lucas's hands moving to indicate the relevant scale of a Brachiosaurus. He felt the thing he always felt watching Lucas, which was too big and too specific to have a name that fit it. Something compounded of Sarah's eyes and his own jaw, and 300 million years of banded shale on a nightstand in Queens, and pasta on Saturday nights, and bread without crusts. "He's the most certain person I know," Derek said. "He hasn't learned yet to doubt himself out of things." "Do we ever come back from that?" Vanessa said. "Once we've learned it?" He thought about that honestly, the way questions that deserved it got treated. "I think you learn to work around it," he said. "You learn which doubts are useful, the ones that keep you checking your work, and which ones are just noise. The trick is telling them apart." She was quiet for a moment. I spent a long time listening to the wrong kind, she said. Most people do, he said. The wrong kind is louder. She turned slightly, looking at him the way she'd learned to look at people, all the way at them, not past them. You don't do that, she said. Listen to the wrong kind. You're one of the quietest people I know, and you're also one of the most certain. I've had a lot of practice at the difference, he said. It's not a gift. It's just repetition. What kind of repetition? He thought about places he didn't talk about decisions made in fractions of seconds that had to be right because there was no margin for being wrong, about Sarah's voice and Lucas's face on the day he was born, and the specific way those things had organized everything else into a kind of hierarchy that made the noise easier to ignore. The kind that costs something, he said. The kind that teaches you what actually matters, because you've stood somewhere that made it clear. She looked at the harbor. He looked at Lucas, who had recruited his new friend into a demonstration that appeared to involve their arms as long dinosaur necks. What matters, she said. Not rhetorically. An actual question, asked to an actual person, in the way she'd been learning to ask things. He thought about it the right way. Showing up, he said. Telling the truth. Knowing who you're doing it for. He paused. The rest of it is details. She nodded slowly. That sounds simple. It's not, he said. Simple and easy aren't the same. No, she said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. I used to think that being the loudest person in the room meant I was the clearest. That if I was confident enough, fast enough, decisive enough, that was the same as being right. She looked at the harbor. I was right a lot of the time. Enough that the feedback loop held. She paused. The thing I wasn't prepared for was the cost. What it costs the people around you when you run that way. I didn't think about that. I didn't think there was a cost because the results kept coming. There's always a cost, Derek said. You just don't always see who's paying it. No, she said. You don't. She was quiet. Philip was paying it. Diana's team was paying it. Raymond was paying it. Did you know Raymond used to work the evening shift but requested a transfer to mornings 2 years ago, and nobody ever asked him why? He told me last month. He has a daughter in school. He wanted to be home in the evenings. He'd been managing around the company's assumptions about what his schedule should be for 2 years, and nobody had ever just asked him what he needed. Derek was quiet. I gave him a flexible schedule, she said. He looked at me like I'd offered him something that cost me something significant, and it cost me nothing at all. It was just seeing him. She stopped. All those years I thought visibility was about me, being seen. And the whole time the people around me were practically invisible and I was standing right next to them. She said this without the performed quality of someone delivering a lesson they've memorized. She said it the way people say things they've genuinely worked out and are still working out, in real time, carrying the weight of what it takes to see yourself clearly. You're changing it, Derek said. I'm trying, she said. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does, he said. That's how you know you mean it. Across the room, Lucas's demonstration had attracted 2 more participants. He was now the center of a small group of children doing dinosaur impressions near the food table, which Eleanor was observing with the expression of a woman who has long since made peace with what her family produces. Vanessa watched them. Something in her face did the thing it had been doing more often lately. The careful, deliberate opening of attention, choosing to see something rather than process it. What's next for you? She said. After this? When things are fully settled. He looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, this isn't what you imagined your life looking like, she said. Driving and protective detail for a company in Manhattan. You could do a lot of things. Corbin offered you something, didn't he? He looked at her. You know about that? Corbin mentioned it to me, she said. He asked if I'd mind. I told him it was your decision. Corbin had offered, in the corridor after the deposition, a consulting arrangement with his federal unit, the specific kind of work that used Derek's specific kind of experience, on the operational side of cases that required it. Project-based, flexible schedule, the kind of offer that meant someone had looked at what he'd done in a parking structure in a 34th floor apartment and decided they wanted access to the thinking that produced it. Derek had said he'd consider it. You should take it, Vanessa said. If you want it. I'm not saying that because I want you to leave on a... I'm saying it because it's the right thing for you, and I've been trying to do more of that. Say the right thing even when it's not convenient. He looked at her. You'd need a new driver. I'd need a new driver, she confirmed. Webb can recommend someone good. She paused. You've done what you came here to do. Actually, what you came here to do the second time, which was hold this together while something real was threatening it, and then put it back on solid ground. She paused. It's on solid ground. He was quiet for a moment. It'll take a few months to transition properly. Take the time you need, she said. Do it right. He looked at the harbor. At Lucas, who had now abandoned the dinosaur demonstration and was making his way back across the room with a plate of things that were, based on color distribution, approximately 40% dessert. Dad, Lucas said, arriving at his elbow. There's a kid over there whose dad works with computers, and he says they're making robots that can do surgery. Is that true? To some degree, Derek said. Could a robot have fixed your shoulder? A robot helped, Derek said. A person was in charge. Lucas considered this. Good, he said. Robots shouldn't be in charge of important things. I agree, Derek said. Lucas looked at Vanessa, then back at his father, then at Vanessa again, with the unfiltered attention of someone who has an observation and sees no reason not to make it. You look nicer than I thought, he said to Vanessa. Lucas, Derek said. What? Lucas said, genuinely confused by any objection to an honest compliment. Vanessa looked at Lucas with an expression that was unmistakably an actual smile, not the managed professional version that Derek had seen occasionally across the rearview mirror, but the real one, the one that was slightly unguarded and surprised at itself. Thank you, she said. You look very nice yourself. That's a good tie. Lucas looked down at the tie with the satisfaction of someone whose choices have been validated. I picked it myself, he said. It shows, she said. Lucas accepted this, added it to his internal record, and went back toward the food table with the plate he'd apparently decided needed supplementing. Derek and Vanessa stood beside each other in the particular quiet that follows an exchange like that, the kind that is small and real and contains more than it appears to. He's going to be something, Vanessa said. He already is, Derek said. She nodded. They stood for a while in the comfortable quiet, two people who had arrived at each other through the worst versions of circumstances and had managed, on the other side of it, to find something worth keeping. Not a friendship shaped by ease, but by the specific honesty of people who had seen each other in difficult moments and hadn't looked away. Later, on the way home, Lucas fell asleep in the back seat of the car before they reached the bridge, the navy tie loosened and slightly askew, his head against the window, the banded shale rock, which he'd insisted on bringing, held in one hand. Eleanor sat beside him, watching the city give way to the bridge, and then to the outer borough dark. Derek drove. The city went by outside the windows. The same city it always was, continuous and indifferent and full of people doing the hard daily work of being human, which mostly looked like nothing and was almost always something. He thought about the morning 11 months ago when he'd first pulled the Escalade to the curb outside Vanessa Holloway's building, 13 minutes early, the way he always was, checking the route twice before leaving because that was who he was and had always been and would continue to be regardless of what anyone in any room made of it. He thought about a water main break on 7th Avenue, about 16 minutes, about the distance between what people looked like and what they actually were, which was almost always larger than anyone accounted for and almost always worth investigating. He thought about Sarah saying they're the same person in different clothes. He thought about Lucas saying she looks nicer than I thought. He thought about Vanessa Holloway standing in a parking structure with shaking legs, looking at her hands like they belonged to someone she'd just met. He thought about all the quiet people in every room he'd ever been in, carrying what they carried, doing what they did, waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to actually look at them. The bridge lights moved across the window. Lucas shifted in his sleep, the rock still in his fist, 300 million years old and worth keeping. Derek drove home through the dark, and the city fell behind him, and his family was in the car, and that was enough. And he knew it was enough. which was the kind of knowing that took a long time and cost something to arrive at, and which, once it came, held.